right, fantastic. And if you could allow me to share, I'll share my slides. I think you need to promote me to host in order to do that. Thanks. Sorry about that. My WebEx just decided to stop working. I don't know why that is. Derek, could you please confirm that you can see my first slide?
Yes, we can.
All right, fantastic. Thanks so much. All right, well, with that out of the way, a good morning, good afternoon, and maybe good evening to some of you out there in the interwebs. So my name is Seth Chamberlain. I work in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services in the Administration for Children and Families in the Office of Family Assistance. And I'm here to kick off a discussion about two programs that I work with, the Healthy Marriage and the Responsible Fatherhood, or HMRF programs. So to frame who we are in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, ACF, the Administration for Children and Families, oversees many of the human services of the Department of Health and Human Services. And the Office of Family Assistance oversees a number of programs to foster family economic security and stability. So most of us have heard of the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, or TANF program. That multi-billion-dollar program is administered by the Office of Family Assistance, OFA. So OFA also administers the Healthy Marriage and Responsible Fatherhood programs. The HMRF programs support OFA's and ACF's broader aim to support families. So HMRF grants, like almost all grants in ACF, focus on low-income families. So in this way, we serve a larger drive towards equity. In other words, we support families that may have been underserved in the past and now experience disparities in family strength and stability. So what is our main objective? Well, our main objective is to support the development of stronger families, of course. So these are pictures of me and my daughters at a water park this past summer. I love my daughters so much. And since I am a dad, I have to tell them corny jokes or they would yank my dad card, right? So for example, here we're ready for fun in the sun. But do you know what you call a dad who falls through the ice? A popsicle, right? And you know the difference between a dad joke and a bad joke. It's only one letter, you know, bad and dad. Every time I see my kids, I tell them I smile because you're my family, and I laugh because there's nothing you can do about it. But the truth is there. Family is there for you through thick and thin. And that's one of the reasons we focus on families. They stick by you. Now, at the outset, I want to be clear that we are not supporting only one type of family. Families come in all shapes and sizes, and we support all of them. So even if that family is led by a married couple who have been married for 10 years, or, you know, whether that family is young and trying to find their way, or perhaps maybe that family is led by a single parent, perhaps a single father, who wants to provide the best household for his child. We support all families. And, you know, we support the notion that every family can be stronger. Now, I don't know what your family situation is, but regardless, I'm sure we all know of ways that our families have grown and strengthened over time. And I'm betting many of us could think of ways we could be even stronger. That's why services like ours exist, to support stronger families. Even for those who are not currently in a romantic relationship, we can provide skills and insights so that when those people are eventually in romantic relationships, they can have stronger families. This applies to youth and even applies to adults who are not currently in a relationship. So, you know, research consistently shows favorable associations for healthy, stable children's and adults' outcomes when there is a healthy family. Now, healthy means families are supportive, positive, and violence-free. And stable means the families do not experience many transitions, such as parents separating and forming new relationships. And there's a reason that we're pushing for stronger families. There's a broad and fairly consistent body of literature that shows positive correlations between children growing up with two married parents in a stable, healthy relationship and more positive outcomes for children and for parents on a range of of measures. Kids are less likely to be in poverty, less likely to experience a wide range of cognitive, emotional, and social problems, not only during childhood, but also in adulthood. My shop works on fatherhood programming too, and studies have shown that kids with involved fathers are less likely to be in poverty, 60% less likely to be suspended or expelled, and twice as likely to go to college. So healthy marriage and responsible fatherhood programs are designed to help interested adults and youth build stronger relationships, marriages, father-child engagement, and families. So it's great to say that we support healthy marriage and responsible fatherhood, but what kind of activities do we actually fund? So healthy marriage and relationship education legislation outlines 8 specific activities that may be supported with the grants, such as services to promote healthy marriage and relationships among individuals or among couples, to reduce divorce. Healthy marriage services can also combine services to support the economic needs of their participants, such as job coaching. Healthy marriage services may serve adult couples, adult individuals, or youth, and these youth are often in high school. The responsible fatherhood legislation is slightly different. It outlines 3 specific activities. The first activity is to promote or sustain marriage. The second activity is to promote responsible parenting. And the third is activities to foster economic stability. Responsible fatherhood services can target fathers in the community, couples in the community that are working together to parent a child, and even fathers who are incarcerated within 9 months of release. So this is what we are able to support. But what does that actually look like on the ground? In practice, most often we find HMRF class services being provided in cohort-based group education. For example, if you attended one of our programs, you would often find individuals or couples together in a room learning from a facilitator or two and taking time to practice skills learned during the session. So it's a little bit about us. Our objective, again, is to foster healthy, stable, economically secure households and communities for the well-being and long-term success of children and families. Since 2006, my office has administered $150 million per year in competitive HMRF grants and contracts, many of which have been focused on research and evaluation. To date, there have been 4 cohorts of HMRF grants. And today, we're going to be focusing on what we learned from the 3rd cohort. So again, that's a little bit about us. So, this is us. Oh, wait a minute, crud, that wasn't the image I wanted to put up there. This is the one, Okay, so this is the project directors from the 2015 cohort of grants. These folks helped to carry out the services that I just talked about. Beautiful bunch they were. So that's a little bit about us. So now it's time for a question about you. Who are you? Now, I know, existential questions can be befuddling. So to try to befuddle the discussion, here are some options. Could we open up the poll, please? Tell us a little bit about who you are. Are you a grantee? Does my office fund your services and you provide healthy marriage or responsible fatherhood services, perhaps to adult couples, to youth, to community fathers or fathers that are re-entering the community? Or perhaps you don't receive funding from us, but you receive funding from elsewhere to do family strengthening services. Let's face it, even though we have specific legislation under which we fund programs, there are many types of programs that can support families. This poll will only be open for another 27 seconds. I'm sorry, 17, 16, 15 seconds. Maybe you're a researcher. Maybe you're a technical assistance provider. Maybe you're like me, we're at the Fed level. Or maybe you're just an interested observer. All right, let's see what the answers were. All right. So we do have a lot of grantee participation here, and we got some researchers and some Fed staff. All right, fantastic. All right, so to close out my segment, I want to get down to the core issue for discussion today: healthy marriage and responsible fatherhood programming. So, did you catch how much money that was $150 million a year? That's a lot of money each year. And you know, reasonable people could ask reasonable questions, such as, you know, what are you actually doing with all that money? What's actually going on in these programs? You know, reasonable people could also ask, are you actually helping people thrive? What are the outcomes, and dare I even ask, impacts for the people that participate? These are great questions. So, you know, since 2006 and before, my agency has carried out numerous evaluations, including evaluations of healthy marriage and responsible fatherhood programs. And those evaluations focus on the effectiveness of a very small proportion of grants. So in 2015, when this cohort started, this third cohort started, we took a different tack. We expanded learning across all grantees. Specifically, for the 2015 cohort of grants, we asked all grantees to collect a consistent set of performance measures on characteristics and outcomes of the people served, the services provided, and the operations of the programs that were funded. We have a system, a management information system, to make sure that the information is collected in a standardized way. And today, we're going to talk about what that system found. In addition, 32 grantees conducted 33 local evaluations. That means grantee-specific evaluations. Now, some of those evaluations were descriptive. They were, you know, what was actually going on in the program, what was the take-up, are there any associations between, you know, participation and outcomes? And then a good proportion were impact studies to examine the effects of the programs writ large or program components. So just to frame this again, prior to 2015, we had evaluations on handfuls of grants. In 2015, we took a different tack. We said, let's learn as much as we can. So it's not enough to offer services that we think will work. Our agency is committed to understanding whether programs are able to achieve their goals and to look for ways to support programs that are struggling and make good programs great. We have a learning agenda to understand how to serve families better. And we're also always looking for ways to share what we've learned. This forum today is an opportunity for us to share what we've learned. So this right here is our current learning agenda. The figure is pretty busy, and if you mistook it for an element of boron, I wouldn't hold it against you, you know, because you got like the 5 electrons, right? Element of boron, but I guarantee there's nothing boron about it. This is an exciting depiction of all of the performance, continuous quality improvement, and evaluation efforts we have woven into the fabric of our grants. I want to make a special mention of the green hoop encircling the middle performance measures encircle so much of what we do. And today, we'll be telling you a little bit more about what we learned from the performance measures that we collected. I also wanted to discuss a few of the yellow balls, maybe the electrons on the outside. So the yellow balls are talking about who did we serve, what programs are implemented, do we improve outcomes, and what are the strategies that demonstrate improvement. So today, we're taking stock of what we learned from the 2015 cohort, and we're going to look ahead. We have 3 great sessions planned for today. The first one will focus on healthy marriage services for adults, the second on healthy marriage youth, and the third on responsible fatherhood. I think that's actually split. I think responsible fatherhood is second. So in each session, we will present highlights from the 85 grantees in the 2015 cohort. And our panelists today aren't just, the pointy-headed researchers, and I can say that because I used to be one. It also involves many of the grantees who carried out these services. Last thing, we want to hear from you. At the end of each segment, there's going to be a Q&A. Please ask your questions, share your experiences, reflect on what we are sharing. We all benefit from learning from one another. So this is our schedule. I've already talked over by 5 minutes, so I owe folks 5 minutes. Oh, I was wrong. So we do healthy marriage grants and healthy marriage youth. I'm sorry, healthy marriage adults and healthy marriage youth and responsible fatherhood grantees. I apologize. And so without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Christine Ross, who will kick off the first segment focused on healthy marriage programs for adults.
Good afternoon, and thank you for attending this forum on findings from the 2015 Healthy Marriage and Responsible Fatherhood Grants. I'll be discussing key information about the 2015 cohort of healthy marriage programs for adults. The next slide, oh, there it is, sorry. Programs that offer healthy marriage and relationship education for adults aim to strengthen families, as Seth has just described. As Seth noted at the top of the forum, stable, healthy families can provide children with a strong foundation for their current and future well-being. Research has shown that children who grow up with both biological parents have advantages over other children: financial, cognitive, and behavioral. Yet 40% of births in the US are to unmarried parents, and about 1/3 of children experience at least one change in their parents' relationship status by age 5. To support families, Congress has awarded healthy marriage and relationship education grants. The 2015 cohort of HMRE grantees could offer any combination of the 8 allowable activities, including, for example, marriage and relationship education and skills, premarital education, marriage enhancement or marriage mentoring, or public advertising campaigns. This presentation will focus on the 37 HMRE grantees that served adults as at least one of their target populations and received a grant in September of 2015. The information will come from performance measure data provided by the grantees and by program clients. That information was placed in a management information system developed for the programs to collect a consistent set of performance measures. That system was called Information, Family Outcomes, Management, and Reporting, or INFORM. Grantee data are from quarterly program operations surveys and from the grantees providing information about services throughout the client's participation in the program. The program client data come from an applicant characteristics survey administered at enrollment, an entrance survey administered at the first workshop, and an exit survey administered at the last workshop or at 28 days after the first workshop for ones that were shorter. All programs need to get the word out to prospective clients about the services that they offer. For HMRE programs, recruitment is an ongoing process and often a challenging one. Grantees use multiple methods to find potential clients and encourage them to apply for the program. All of the HMRE grantees reported recruiting on-site at community agencies. In addition, most reported using phone, mail, and street outreach, that is, recruiting at different places in the community, such as on public transportation or at gathering places. They needed to use use various methods to recruit all the clients that they were aiming to. In total, the 37 HMRE grantees serving adults enrolled 96,000 clients. They were about evenly split between individuals and couples. Clients learned about the HMRE programs through direct contact with individuals and agencies. The green bar in this figure shows the percentage of adult individuals who heard about the program in a particular way, and the gold bar shows the percentage of clients and adult couples who heard about the program in that way. The three most common ways that clients reported learning about the program were word of mouth and from program staff or at an event, and from a government agency or community organization. So these were some of the ways clients told us that they came to the programs. Clients offered their main reason for enrolling in the programs, and again, the responses from individual enrollees is in green, and the responses from couples are in gold. Most clients wanted to learn how to improve their personal relationships, and the second most common reason was learning to be a better parent. Next, we'll describe the characteristics of HMRE adult clients at enrollment based on the client's own reports. HMRE adult clients spanned a range of ages, and they were racially and ethnically diverse. This was true for adults who enrolled as individuals, as well as for the adult couples. So you can see that the percentages are pretty high in all the categories. Most HMRE couples were married or had a steady romantic partner. You can see the gold bars for the couples. Over half of individual clients with the green bars were in a relationship. Fewer than half of HMRE adult clients who enrolled in programs for individuals were employed. That's at 46%. Those are the green bars. And most HMRE adult clients who enrolled in programs for couples were employed. That's the gold bar. And then looking at employment challenges, most clients reported that they experienced at least one challenge in finding or keeping a job. The graph here is showing the percentage who reported no challenges, and so the percentage that faced challenges was larger than half. Most individuals cited a lack of reliable transportation, and most people in both groups, couples and individuals, reported not having the right skills or education for good jobs. Next, we'll talk about the services. To build clients' relationship and parenting skills and to support their economic well-being, HMRE grantees offered a range of services to adults. Group-based workshops were typically the centerpiece of the program, which were offered over one or more sessions. All of the programs offered workshops in marriage and relationship education and conflict resolution. Most programs also offered activities related to parenting, financial management, and marriage enhancement. Workshops were offered with a wide range of hours, with the average number of hours for a workshop at 13. Grantees also provided individual service contacts, such as case management, and referrals for services offered by other organizations. Most HMRE adult clients participated in services at least once, and participation typically spanned 4 to 5 weeks. Services refers to either workshop attendance or an individual service contact, such as case management, that lasted at least 15 minutes. We use this as a bar for counting the service contacts because shorter contacts were more likely to be just reminders or other interactions that were not substantive. The median time between the client's first and last service was about 5 weeks or 36 days for those who participated in at least one service. There was a wide range of participation durations across clients, from 1 day to 1,500 days. The median hours of services that were received by clients were similar when you look at all enrolled clients, that's the green bar, anyone who enrolls, at 12 hours, as well as for those who attended at least one workshop, which is shown in the gold bar, for 13 hours. So they were pretty close whether you enrolled or went to the first service. Most adult clients had at least one individual service contact that lasted at least 15 minutes. Common topics covered in these contacts for each population were healthy marriage and relationship education services and assessments. And next, we're going to present some findings on changes in clients' outcomes from the beginning to the end of the program. The outcomes include clients' self-reported perceptions, attitudes, and behaviors. These outcomes represent goals of the HMRE programs, but note that changes that we talk about for these outcomes from the beginning to the end of the program do not necessarily represent the program's effects. Most clients reported that they enrolled in the programs to improve their personal relationships or to become a better parent, as we noted earlier. Because they were motivated to improve, they might have changed even if they did not have access to program services. So we cannot tell from these analyses what part of the changes from the first workshop to the last workshop is attributable to the program. For that, we need an impact study, and we'll discuss some impact study findings later in this presentation. This information on changes from the beginning to the end of the program is based on the surveys that clients typically completed at the first and last workshops that are called the entrance and exit surveys. The analysis is therefore limited to the 70% of adult clients who completed both of these surveys. It measures changes from the beginning to the end of the program, but not beyond that. So with that in mind, let's look at some of the changes. So we're going to show several figures that look more or less like this. And so I want to first talk about what you're seeing here. It's showing the changes for individuals and couples separately. So individuals at program entry are in dark green, and individuals at program exit are in gold. So those are the first 2 bars in each group are for individuals at program entry and exit. Then the next 2 bars in each group show couples. The light green bar shows entry, and the dark blue bar shows the couples at exit. So first individuals and then couples in each of these groups of bars. This figure shows relationship status at program entry and program exit. So adult individuals in dark green and gold were less likely to be in a relationship over time, whereas adult couples in light green and dark blue bars were more likely to be married at program exit than at program entry. So the first group you see married, and so the couples, there's an increase from 67% to 69% from entry to exit. And for individuals, you see the not in the relationship, the last set of bars, and that increased for the individuals. The next we'll look at is that adult clients reported improvements in their relationships over time in both of the groups. Again, we're showing adult individuals at entry and exit in the dark green and the gold bars, and adult couples at program entry and exit in the light green and dark blue bars. Larger percentages of both the individuals and couples reported being very satisfied with the way they and their partner handled conflict at exit from the program compared to entry. They also reported improvements in the support they felt from their partner and in companionship. Those are not shown in this, but you can find that in the report. And finally, employment increased among both groups between program entry and exit. Again, the first two bars are individuals at program entry and exit, and the second two bars are couples at program entry and exit. Full-time employment, the first set of bars, increased for both groups, and not working, the third set of bars, declined for both groups between program entry and exit. Next, we'll talk about some of the findings from local evaluations of HMRE programs for adults. In the 2015 grantee cohort, a subset of grantees conducted local evaluations of their programs. We'll provide just a few high-level findings from the evaluations, but if you're interested in more information about them, the reports are available on the Office of Family Assistance webpage, and we'll provide a link to that at the end of this presentation. 7 HMRE grantees serving adults conducted local descriptive evaluations, and these evaluations answered questions about grantees' program operations and implementation, as well as changes in client outcomes over time. 6 of the HMRE grantees serving adults conducted local impact evaluations, and these evaluations could answer questions about whether and how the programs affected clients' relationships, parenting, and economic well-being. The grantees that conducted local evaluations are not necessarily representative of the full 2015 cohort or of HMRE programs in general, but their evaluations provide some useful findings about some of the programs in this cohort. Several of the descriptive evaluations examined recruitment and program attendance, and they found that clients whose characteristics suggested they had fewer competing demands on their time had higher levels of participation. For example, the clients with fewer children or who were not working tended to have higher levels of participation. In addition, certain characteristics of the programs were associated with better attendance. For example, a shorter workshop series or accommodating changing family and work schedules by allowing clients to attend workshop sessions that were scheduled at different times during the week were associated with better attendance. The HMRE adult impact evaluations showed some favorable effects of the programs. Note that these impact evaluations could isolate the program effects from other influences on outcomes because they used a random assignment design. Evaluations found that clients were more satisfied with their relationships. and adult individuals and couples improved their skills in promoting healthy relationships and managing conflict. So this presentation has just hit on some of the highlights of the findings about the HMRE grantees from the 2015 cohort. If you would like more information about the 2015 cohort of grantees, several publications will be available later this fall. There will be 3 reports on the cross-site findings for responsible fatherhood, HMRE adults, and HMRE youth programs, a technical appendix for these reports with details on the methods and findings, and digital interactive snapshots for responsible fatherhood and HMRE. The local evaluation reports are available online now on the website of the Office of Family Assistance. And thank you for your interest in the findings for the HMRE programs for adults. And now I'd like to introduce our moderator, Grace Romer, Principal Researcher at Mathematica. Grace?
Hi, thanks so much, Chris, for sharing findings on healthy marriage adults. Can you hear me okay? Great. I'm excited to introduce today's panel for our discussion of the findings that Chris just shared. I'll start with Francesca Adler-Bader. Francesca is the AU Alumni Professor of Human Development and Family Studies at Auburn University in Alabama, and she's directed the Alabama Healthy Marriage and Relationship Education Initiative for 20 years, partnering with multiple community-based organizations. She's developed HMRE curricula and resources, implemented programs for diverse groups of youth and adults, and conducted research and evaluation. In addition, she's written over 80 publications on HMRE work that primarily centers on the understanding and promotion of relationship health, interpersonal competence, and family and individual resilience, with a special emphasis on the experiences of more vulnerable and structurally complex families. And Kay Bradford also joins us today. He's a professor of family studies at Utah State University. At the undergraduate level, he teaches a course in child guidance, and at the graduate level teaches family theories, family relationship, and ethics in couple and family therapy. His research focuses on processes and outcomes in relationship education, and his current funded projects reach youth in high-risk contexts as well as incarcerated fathers. Dr. Bradford is also an active marriage and family therapist. Galena Rhodes is a research professor in the psychology department at the University of Denver. Her research focuses on maternal health, romantic relationship, development and functioning, the related implications for children and adults, and the effectiveness of prevention programs and interventions for families. Galena has over 100 publications in these areas and leads several related federally funded evaluations. In addition, Dr. Rhodes runs MotherWise, a community program that serves women during pregnancy and postpartum. And Melissa Herzog is also joining our panel today. And thanks, panelists, for turning on your video. Melissa is an assistant teaching professor of human development and family science at the University of Missouri. She's the co-investigator for Show Me Healthy Relationships, which is now in its second cycle of healthy marriage funding and currently serves single adults in 23 Missouri counties. In addition to her work with Show Me Healthy Relationships, Dr. Herzog is also the lead faculty and advisor for a graduate program in youth development, where she teaches courses in positive youth development frameworks, youth family relationships, and youth sexuality and relationship education. And I'd like to add, we've got more information about our speakers on the event page that you use to register for today's program. So before we get the discussion started, I'd like to encourage, again, the audience to let us know of any questions that come up in the chat. We're going to pause at a couple of points during the discussion to answer your questions, but you don't need to wait for those points. If, as you have a question, feel free to enter it in the chat. So to kick off our discussion, I'd like to ask each of our panelists to share their overarching perspectives on the findings that Chris just shared with us. And Francesca, I'm wondering if you could get us started and share your view on what we've learned about healthy marriage adults. What information confirmed what you already thought about healthy marriage programs, and what surprised you?
Thanks so much, Grace. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
All right.
Thanks.
So first point, I have to clarify that I am at Auburn University and not the University of Alabama.
So,
Maybe after the Iron Bowl, I'll want to defect, but anyway, here's where I am for the last 20 years. Thanks so much for including me. I'll go pretty quick to give everyone time, but first thing I have to say is how excited I am to see this report. For those that are newer grantees, this was really emotional for me to see this. I think this is, 15, almost 20 years in the making, to see it all put together in one picture. And so I just want to really commend OFA, the leadership there, everyone at Mathematica that put this together over the last 5 years, helped, very diverse grantees implement the Inform system and create this collective picture of what we've done. So yes, very big milestone, I think. A lot of things that I guess weren't surprising to me. We've had a large project here in Alabama, so a lot of the kind of picture of the participants and their experiences look very similar. But I do think I was impressed with the number, 96,000. I did a quick math on that, and that means out of 37 grantees, they average about 650 adults served each year, because they were collected over 4 years. I thought that was impressive. Clearly, the diversity of the participants shows that we are serving historically underserved populations, and I think that is just critical. The attendance rates are high, which means the recruitment efforts are effective, and I think especially effective over time. I think in the data you presented, Chris, the more important information is actually not what we say we're doing to recruit, but what the participants say they're responding to. And what stood out to me is that the expensive forms of advertising that we did early on in this initiative, and we did billboards, we did jumbotrons in the stadiums, we did TV ads. That's not what's bringing people in. That's not what they're saying is bringing them in. It is the high touch recruitment efforts that really stood out to me and affirmed it. I would also, let me comment on the results, the pre-post, because you very importantly give the qualifier, this is not program effects. These are very modest changes, but the cheerleading I want to do here is that so often the small changes are big victories, because what we know from the impact studies, which we did conduct one of these, it could be that the normal pattern of change is decline. And so even if you don't show any significant change from pre to post, it may be that maintenance of levels of individual well-being, couple functioning, family harmony, things like that are actually important program effects, because without the program, there may unfortunately be declines over time. So I want to emphasize that. And there's probably a qualifier here too, because some of the exit surveys, I think there's a portion that were collected sometime later, because we have kind of an open-ended time that we can collect. But if you maybe narrow to just the immediate pre and post, that may be a little bit larger pre to post change that we might see. But I thought it was really encouraging news overall.
Great. Thanks so much, Francesca. And my apologies for the misstatement. I need to follow college football much more closely, so my apologies. I'd like to ask Galina now if you could share your view on what we've learned, and what confirmed what you've seen and what surprised you.
Thank you, and thank you for having me this morning, or this afternoon for many of you. One of the things that really stood out to me, as Francesca noted, was the number served. This is incredible reach to think about the number of individuals and couples who've been served by these programs and by this funding initiative. And I think one of the things that really stands out to me in that is that half of those were attending individual services. And that's new to this field. So much of the field of relationship education historically has been focused on serving couples and serving two partners who can come to services together. And we've seen such expansion in that, especially in this last round of grants, the 2015 to 2020 grantees. Many of them were serving high school students, serving youth, but many of them were also serving individual adults, right, who were coming to these kinds of programs. And I think that that's really important for us as a field to acknowledge that relationship education is not synonymous with couple education. We're serving many individuals who either are coming on their own because their partner can't attend, possibly due to work, deployment, or incarceration. We're also serving many individuals, as the data show, who may not be in a relationship. And to me, I think that is such a key time to intervene with relationship education, because there is so much that we can teach, we can learn about healthy relationships before people are at the point of being able to attend as a couple. So I just really love seeing those numbers, that this program, this grant program, is serving such a range of individuals and such a diversity in terms of their relationship statuses, that many of them may not be in a relationship. Many of them are in very committed relationships or marriages. And I think that's really important for us as a field to see that kind of expansion and reach.
Great. Thanks so much, Galina. And then Melissa, if you could share your reaction to the findings that Chris shared, that would be great.
Sure. Again, thank you for having me here. I really appreciate it. One of the things that I think is most interesting, particularly as someone who teaches about relationships and relationship science to college students every day, is the idea that folks are reporting both changes in their behaviors, in how they communicate with their partners and how they resolve conflicts with their partners. But how they feel and how they interpret those relationships is also improving, right? And so what we know in relationship science in general is that how we think and how we feel is often a big driver of our actual behaviors in our relationships with other people. And so helping folks to see their partners or their future partners in a more positive, a more functional light, that's more likely to help to lead them to also enact those behavioral changes, right? We start to feel better, we start to do better. So I really appreciate that there are both of those components that are assessed and addressed in so many of the programs that grantees have done. So it's really about increasing knowledge, but also changing attitudes and changing behaviors. And I think that those are really powerful forces when all in combination.
Great. Thanks so much, Melissa. And Kay, if you could share your reaction to the findings, that would be great.
Hello, everybody across the country. I also appreciate being here and this opportunity. Like Francesca, I am excited. Since 2005, if you compare, OFA's increased emphasis on research is encouraging. And I appreciate the fact that OFA and just that balance between the research and pragmatic issues as interventionists. Some of the key things that hit me about this report, the report illustrates reach. We can deliver effective prevention to a large number of couples, 96,000 couples and individuals here. Back in the early days, as Francesca mentioned, in terms of diversity, we weren't confident that RE was reaching those who most need it. And in fact, it seemed that we were at first reaching the middle class, the so-called worried well. But this report shows that we can reach those in need, including diverse populations. To me, the report matters in terms of documenting impact. As Seth was saying earlier, this money, which is substantive, the money does translate into higher levels of relationship satisfaction, conflict management skills, knowledge of personal finance. As a mental health professional, The documented gains in mental health are very encouraging to me. I was a little surprised at the findings on dosage. The local evaluations found that greater improvements in outcomes were not associated with higher levels of participation. And so, I think that question of dosage remains an important empirical question. I'm also struck by the fact that we typically have a fairly short period of time to intervene, a mean of 36 days from first to last service. As a researcher, I think this means we should continue to look for and document the short-term impacts. What are the changes in knowledge and attitudes, as well as long-term impacts like communication skills and commitment?
Thank you, Kay, and thank you for speaking to that point. I did want to ask the panel to comment on the participation, and I think you were specifically talking about the approximate 1 month of participation and 13 hours of workshop content for those who participated in at least one session. And I wondered if the other panelists could speak to that as well. What was your reaction to that finding? And feel free to jump in. Melissa, do you want to respond to that?
Sure. I also was actually pretty surprised by that, right? The conventional wisdom would say if we spend more time with you, we cover more ground, we allow you more opportunities to practice, to discuss, and to really work through it, particularly in the case of couples who might be participating together. One would expect that you would see more positive outcomes, right? Bigger gains from pre to post. And so, yeah, I did find that surprising, similarly to Kay, but there may be some power in just the idea of thinking about it, right? That any sort of exposure at all starts us thinking in a new mindset. And, one of the things that we saw in our program here in Missouri was, if we could get somebody into that first session and they attended that first one, they were much more likely to stay because now they're invested, right? And so I think that there may be something in terms of continuing to investigate this question with a little bit more nuance to see if it's not just the time that we spend, but how we spend it and how motivated people are and what they want to get out of that time. So, but yes, I did find the dosage issue pretty surprising.
Thanks, Melissa. And Francesca?
I can comment here too. So my thought on that was that probably what we're seeing is a threshold effect, right? So I didn't see the analysis on these that study, but I'm assuming they looked at more of a linear relationship. The more, the better. And we do have, I think there's a recent meta-analysis paper that was published, Arnold and Beelman, that showed 6 hours was a threshold, and beyond, meaning beyond that, maybe there's more maintenance of effects rather than keep increasing the effects. So it makes sense to me in that way. Early on, we did a similar kind of test, and we actually showed we could document positive effects at 3 hours of participation. So I think that's what we're dealing with. And I think Alan Hawkins has a meta-analysis as well that found that kind of the moderate versus the super extended engagement had very positive effects. And again, not that 24 hours is not also effective. It may not be comparatively more effective, because again, this is testing a linear relationship of more dose, more effect.
Thanks. And
by the way,
Selena, if you've got anything to, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, please, Dr. Rose, yes.
Thank you. I'm just getting so excited about the many possibilities for future research on all of these questions, right? This evaluation really shows the promise of these programs. And I think what we need to know next is what works about them, for whom do they work best, what dosage matters, and there's just so many ways that we can follow up on these important findings to learn more about the programs and the population that these programs serve. And one other thing that I'm thinking about, if I sort of wear my program and curriculum hat for a moment, is that dose isn't linear, as Francesca was pointing out, but it's not linear because the programs also aren't always linear. Some programs might be very skills focused, and it might be that a certain amount of dose and timeline for delivery, maybe that's a day-long workshop model, works for certain kinds of components of programs like communication skills. If you think about other parts of programs or other programs that are more conceptual, helping people really recognize what healthy relationships are, looking at healthy and unhealthy patterns, not just communication patterns, but longer term patterns in relationships, that may require a different model of delivery and different dosage as well. So I think thinking about the components, the skills-based components, the more conceptual or theoretical components, and a lot of these programs really cover both of those, but I think those would be such exciting things for us to get to look at in future research with these programs.
Thanks so much, Galina. And I wonder if others could speak to that as well. What do the findings suggest to you about future research and maybe ACF research priorities?
To follow up on Galina's comment and also perhaps Francesca's comment, our own local data, we took a look at our couple program, VanEpp's couple links. And in terms of that threshold, a lot of our couples only received 6 hours. In our case, it was 6 to 8. And we found moderate to strong effect sizes. And to your point, Galina, I think our findings kind of bear out what you were talking about. For example, we found a Cohen's d of 0.6 for communication gains, which is fairly, a moderate strength is interesting there. And for relationship knowledge, it was 0.87. And so that does seem to suggest that there are going to be differential effects in terms of dosage, and maybe the shorter term outcomes will have different effects versus the longer term, and possibly depending on dosage.
And what data, in addition to the performance measures, might be needed to answer these questions?
I'll take that one. I think, in terms of the performance data that exists, one area where we could really enhance what we're trying to do, particularly as we move forward into this new cycle of funding where grantees are serving couples or individuals, is to really have that mindset of knowledge and attitudes and beliefs in mind. And Galina spoke to that just a little bit as well. But I think that there really is an opportunity perhaps to use some of the same sorts of measurements that we're using for the youth studies that are talking about what are my intentions? How do I plan to make decisions? How am I thinking about what I want and what I value in relationships? That sort of intentionality piece, I think that we could do similar sorts of things in that sort of measurement of adults to really get at this idea of how do we help people have healthier relationships from the start as that more preventative approach before they even get into relationships. So I do think that that's a wonderful opportunity that we could potentially grow in the future.
Great. Thanks so much, Melissa. We have actually gotten a couple of questions in the chat, so I just want to bring those up now. The first question is about client characteristics. Can we share more client characteristics that have shown higher levels of participation in programming? As Chris mentioned, the findings will be shared soon, but I'm wondering if actually the panel could speak to that and really how the characteristics that Chris reported on aligned with what you were saying. I think many of you shared that it seemed that the program was reaching who you had hoped it to reach. But if you could speak to that from your experience directly with the programs, running them and evaluating them. I mean, Galina, maybe if you want to start.
I think that's a great question regarding attendance in particular and engagement and different characteristics. And I don't know that we know across the board. Sorry, I've got a phone ringing on here. Who might be most likely to attend? You know, from the evaluations that I've worked on, I can't say that we have seen consistency with different subgroup analyses. But one of the things I think is most important to look at in that is really the match between the clients that you're enrolling and the program that's being offered and who it's being offered by. You know, one of the things that our program Motherwise has been very committed to is offering all of our services in English and Spanish. And that when we offer services in Spanish, we want to make sure that the facilitators and the family support coordinators or case managers are a good match culturally for those that we're enrolling into those classes. And anecdotally, we have seen higher rates of attendance actually in our Spanish speaking groups than in our English speaking groups. But across the board, I don't know of any data that really point to certain groups where we might see higher attendance overall. So I'd be interested in what others have seen on that front.
And I'll just throw in before asking other panelists to speak, we do have a related question, whether anyone has seen a consistent pattern where females are reporting or showing greater improvement compared to male partners. So Galina, you just spoke about English, Spanish, making sure to serve both, but if our panel has seen anything about gender differences in their programs.
I'd like to speak empirically to that point. I mean, it remains to be seen, I think, because different samples probably we may see different outcomes. We're not. If we just look at the different outcomes, we're generally not seeing much in terms of differences between men and women. But here, when we add other moderators, we do find some kind of interesting differences. Going back to the issue of recruitment and retention, which is a struggle for many of us, you know, just as they say, getting butts in seats. At least among our fathers, we found that in our fatherhood classes, empirically what we found was that our dads who have lower education were less likely to show up. Interestingly, those who had higher incomes were less likely to show up. And those who had higher relationship conflicts and who were younger were also less likely to show up. So we've begun to look at some of those characteristics. We're finding that other moderators matter, for example, in terms of outcomes. Recently, one of my team, Dr. Scott Crapo, took a look at data, and he found that in terms of progressiveness or traditionality, those who were cohabiting versus married, especially in the earlier stages of their relationship, those who were non-traditional, i.e. cohabiting, both the pre and post had lower outcomes of relationship knowledge and also lower levels of commitment. And so we're finding empirically that it does matter, you know, some of those characteristics of the participants do matter. And it probably matters to the educators in terms of how to recruit and retain and also how to educate.
Thanks so much, AK. And this question has another part where is there, I guess, have you seen any any potential response shift bias with males overestimating how good things are at the start of the program. You know, perhaps Francesca or Melissa could speak to that, and whether that influences the story of the impact on couples in your experience.
I can speak to this maybe more broadly, the way that we're discussing. I think that's a great question, Ted, and it's a great specific empirical test. We have not looked at those gender differences yet, but what I can share here, we have a pretty large diverse sample that we did an impact study with over a 2-year period. And so we've already done, it's not ready for prime time yet, but we will have a publication where we looked at the variation that we expect in those patterns of change and try to identify profiles. And that's what I think we're talking about here. So this report that kind of aggregates everything and you have an average experience, very important. And I think our next important step is actually the disaggregation, looking at profiles of our diverse populations and how and whether they change over time. So we used a mixture modeling procedure, which shows you first that there are different patterns of change. And just real simply, I can say there are some who start high and stay high. Not surprisingly, they're higher resource. There are some who kind of tanked at first and then had a steady increase. We found that characteristically they tended to be the newer parents. And then we had a group that were kind of the arc, so immediate kind of honeymoon effects, and then a pretty significant drop off over time. And those, as you would guess, would be the lower resourced populations, usually meaning lower income, job issues. And so that to me speaks to how do we monitor programmatically and anticipate those kinds of differing patterns of change and maybe adapt our program design. So if we know we are serving predominantly lower resource, we might get really excited about the honeymoon effect, but then understand, well, we're going to have to expect some drop off. So what are the boosters? What are the re-engagement strategies? And historically, we've emphasized more this initial dose. And I don't know that there's a lot of programs that are really implementing those kind of later booster, now that we're thinking about boosters, right, in this country, and implementing that. So I think overall, this is where I think the research is going, is recognizing we now serve this diverse population and we're looking for fit. I don't think we're looking any longer for the does it work question. I think we have a lot of evidence that says, yeah, on average. But now I think our questions are more about fit, and then what characteristics of the participant and of facilitators, what kind of training are they getting? What kind of class climate are they creating? What fits better for different people? And maybe you'll find gender differences there too, to kind of bring it back to that. So maybe even within couple, you could see some variation, and that will be interesting to address.
Great, thanks so much. And we do have a couple of other comments and questions. And I think as folks can see in the chat, a reference to a meta-analysis of ACF-funded studies that didn't actually see differences in outcomes and in outcomes by gender. But Francesca, excellent points about where to look going forward. The next question is, was there any evidence to suggest that participants in general tend to overestimate their self-assessment of relationship skills before starting the program? Are there any programs that measure this shortly after they begin to participate in the program to compare these scores to the pre-scores? And Chris, I wondered if you could get us started on that, Chris Ross, and then maybe the panelists could jump in.
Could you just repeat that just for a second? Sorry, I was looking at the chat.
Sure, I think, right. So the question is really asking if we looked at whether participants are tending to overestimate their self-assessment of their relationship skills at the start of the program.
Yeah, so I don't think we have looked at that, but I think it's something that some of the local researchers could look at. One would need to I think from Ted's question, he was asking whether there's a difference for male and female partners in their view of the relationship, and I have not seen anything in the in the local evaluations about that. So I don't know, but someone would need to kind of look at the male, female, and look at it for couples and see how much divergence there is in evaluating their situation as they come into the program.
Thanks, Chris. I wondered if any of our panelists want to speak to that question as well.
I can speak to that a little bit, Grace. It's something that our lab at the University of Denver, Scott Stanley and Howard Markman and I have kicked around for quite a long time, because in some studies we've seen a decline early in programming on communication. And one of the things similar to, I think, what Liz is suggesting here is that what may happen is that as people learn in programs more about what healthy relationships look like, that then they're able to do sort of a more valid assessment of where they are in their relationships, right? So if you know, you ask people today, how's your communication? You got a fairly satisfied, happy group of couples. We're pretty good at communicating. And then we teach you what good communication looks like or what bad communication looks like. You know, they may reevaluate and we may see a decrease in some of those relationship skills or relationship qualities because of that. And it actually is fairly hard to figure out how to study that well. So that would be a really neat target for future research in this area with these kinds of programs.
Great, thanks, Galina. And there's another comment in the chat of 2 studies that seem to indicate evidence of response shift bias, and acknowledging, as you've just acknowledged, that more good work is needed here. So we're at time, but I did just quickly want to ask each of our panelists, since we do have so many practitioners on the call, and you are practitioners yourself, how do you plan to use the data from these reports? Do you think they'll inform your outreach and retention strategies in your programs, develop new research questions, or set benchmarks for your grant? So if we could just quickly go around the panel and just conclude that way with your takeaways for the practitioners in the audience about how best to use the findings.
I can start.
If I can just kind of jump on that last comment and maybe transition to that question. I think, as it could be Ellen Hawkins who mentioned, in some of our data, we actually did find evidence of, to that question of response shift bias, and there wasn't a gender difference. Both men and women tended to be optimistic in what they already knew, and they didn't know what they didn't know. And so we found significant differences in the retrospective pre versus the real pre. After the program, they said, oh, I guess I didn't know as much. So just going to your question, maybe looking forward, it looks like we probably need to do some, look to different methods, maybe some retrospective methodology in terms of pre-post. It'd be nice if we could do some control groups, be more confident in identifying effect. And of course, the question of longitudinal is always very, very important.
Great, thanks so much, Kay. And Francesca, if you could jump in next.
Yeah, so how to use the results. Use the results. Stakeholder reports, press release, share the good news. I think we have already done, and I can share a link to this, our own stakeholder report using the informed data, and then our impact study results, because we actually have now up to the 2-year mark that we're continuing to show program effects in many of those key outcome areas. So our story is your story. It's part of the collective story. And I think it's really important when you think of your stakeholders to go back to your participants, to find some some way to share the information. What we like to do is actually even do in person some focus groups so that we can get feedback as well. Like, here's the results, here's what we asked about. Because often you get good research question ideas where folks will say, yeah, did you consider, or did you also ask about, you know, this area that I feel like it impacted me, but you didn't ask any questions about that. So that would be my encouragement, is to help people recognize that what you're doing in your specific community or communities is part of this broad initiative that is now in its 20th year, long history of outreach and now impact.
Great, thanks so much. And Melissa, if you could share next.
Yeah, I think one of the things that is really interesting, especially with the times that we are in right now, is the idea of, does it even matter how we reach these individuals or that we reach them at all? So the notion that many of us are doing online delivery right now. Some folks may have been doing it for quite some time, but certainly with COVID restrictions, that is much more the norm than the exception, at least for right now. And so getting some really good explorations of, does that modality make a difference in the effects that we see of our programs, but also does it potentially exclude exactly who we're trying to reach, right? Is that part of how we should be considering what works for whom, if we also have to consider access issues related to online delivery? So, you know, in our own data, we are seeing that our couple relationship education outcomes are the same. There are no significant differences between those who participated in our online delivery and a matched sample of those who participated in our more standard face-to-face programs. But that was also a matched sample. It doesn't tell us if we failed to reach certain groups of individuals in that online delivery method and therefore kind of left them out of this picture. So I do think that that is an opportunity that a lot of us could have moving forward.
Thanks so much. And Galina, final thoughts to share?
I have two thoughts on this great question about, you know, from a program perspective, how do you use this information and these data? One is, it's just a great reminder that these are data that we all have access to, right? And you don't have to be a researcher or an evaluator to make good use of the data that you are collecting through NFORM. And so I'm motivated once again to look at those data for my own program and the programs that I evaluate, and get a sense of what this first year has looked like according to the NFORM data that we already have. So I really encourage that. And the last thing I want to mention is, I just want to highlight something that Francesca said several turns ago now. She said, the question isn't whether these programs work. We know the answer, that they do. And this report goes a long way to show that these kinds of programs across the 96,000 people who participated in that last round of funding, that these programs have an impact. And that's really important. In 2015, we wouldn't have concluded that yet. And it's important to take that information with us to stakeholders and thinking about how we bring these programs to our community. And from a research perspective, that's just a really important thing to be able to conclude, that we are no longer at the point of asking, do these programs work? We're now at the place of being able to think through many other questions about implementation and dosage and components, and for whom these programs work best and why, which is just really important for us to recognize in the field of relationship education.
Great, thanks so much. Well, we're a bit over time, but you know, this has been a fantastic discussion, and I want to thank Chris for sharing the results with everyone, and our wonderful panel, Francesca, Kay, Galina, and Melissa, for participating today to talk through the findings on healthy marriage adults, both individuals and couples. And we are going to go into a short break now before the next session starts. And again, thank you so much to our panel for joining us today and sharing your thoughts and, both on the findings and looking ahead to the future.
I would like to welcome you back for our next session of the forum, which will be focusing on healthy marriage grantees serving youth. So I'll be kicking it off with a 15-minute overview of the findings on these grantees, and then I'll pass it on to my colleague Matthew, who will be facilitating a discussion with our set of expert panelists. So just to start off with a bit of background on healthy marriage and relationship education programs for youth. So as they become adults, youth will be faced with decisions about relationships and parenthood that can affect their long-term well-being. Programs run by HMRE grantees can help these youth prepare for adulthood, including these types of decisions. HMRE programs can offer services in high schools, for example, as part of a health curriculum or in other settings, and topics covered might include relationship skills such as effective communication and conflict management, or information on unhealthy relationship behaviors such as teen dating violence. So today's presentation will focus on 29 of the HMRE grantees that served youth and received a grant in that 2015 cohort of grantees. We'll be presenting findings about these HMRE grantees and the youth clients that they served using performance measure data that Chris touched on in the prior presentation. So we have data from grantees that they reported on program operations through a survey, including information about the methods that they used for recruitment and advertising. And we also have detailed information about the services that grantees provided. We have detailed data on clients through a series of surveys. So we have the applicant characteristics survey that was administered at program enrollment, as well as entrance and exit surveys that covered information on outcomes, measures of well-being, attitudes, and behaviors among the youth. So the entrance survey was administered at the first workshop that youth attended, and the exit survey was administered at the last workshop that they attended, or 28 days after the first workshop. So we'll be using these performance measure data to provide an overview today of the characteristics of the youth that enrolled in these programs, the services that grantees offered and that the youth received, and how the youth's outcomes changed over the time that they participated in these programs. So I'll first present some findings on average characteristics of the youth clients that participated in HMRE programs. So the 2015 cohort of grantees enrolled over 66,000 youth in their programs. These youth clients were about evenly split by gender, and the majority of them were under 18 years old, though not all. So about 8% were over 18. And these clients were racially and ethnically diverse. So about a third of the clients were Latino, 16% were Black, and about 30% were white. And almost all of the HMRE youth clients were enrolled in school. So about 2/3 of these clients were in the 9th or 10th grade, and about 1% were in college and 2% were in 8th grade or younger. So I'll talk a bit next about the services that grantees offered and that youth clients participated in. So just generally, these HMRE services for youth typically aim to provide these youth clients with the information or the skills that they need to develop and maintain healthy relationships. And these services can be offered as group workshops or as individual service contacts. So as with the HMRE adult programs, group workshops were the centerpiece of most youth programs as well. But grantees could also offer individual service contacts such as case management, and they are actually required to offer case management services unless they received an exemption from ACF. So almost all HMRE youth who enrolled in the HMRE program participated in a service, whether that was an individual service contact or a workshop. And clients typically participated in these programs for about 5 weeks on average, from their first substantive service contact or workshop until their last. However, this range was quite wide across clients, ranging from 0 days for clients who never engaged in a service to up to 1,400 days, or about 4 years. And the typical client who attended at least one workshop was in workshops for about 12 hours total. So as I mentioned earlier, group-based workshops were the most common service that youth participated in, and fewer youth clients participated in individual service contacts like case management. So about 23% of youth clients had at least one individual service contact that lasted at least 15 minutes or longer. So next I'll talk a bit about how these youth clients' outcomes, including their self-reported perceptions, behaviors, and attitudes, changed from the beginning of the program until its end. So using the survey data that the clients reported at program entry and exit, we can measure changes in their outcomes from when they entered the program compared to when they finished it. So as we talked about, change in youth's expectations and well-being over the course of the program is often a goal of these programs, but these types of changes are not necessarily caused by the program services themselves. So especially among youth who are in a period of transition in their lives, change happens for many reasons that might not be because of the program. And for example, youth who are more motivated may have changed even if they weren't receiving program services. And as we talked about in the last session, the only way that we can measure the effect of the program is through an impact evaluation, and we will talk a bit about the results from local impact evaluations later on in this presentation. So we first assessed youth's expectations of their future relationships and parenting, and how this changed from the beginning to the end of the program. And we found that these expectations for the future generally remained stable between program enrollment and program exit. We did find a 1 percentage point higher proportion of youth reported at program exit that they expected marriage to be lifelong. So youth who are in relationships during the program were asked about their partner's relationship behaviors, like whether the partner makes the client feel good or wants to control what the client does. And we use that information to create a summary score that measures the level of unhealthy relationship behaviors at program entry and program exit. And we found that the summary score increased from 1.3 at program entry to 1.35 at program exit, indicating an increase in reported unhealthy relationship behaviors among youth. Now, this increase could be due to an increase in unhealthy behaviors by the youth's partner, but it could also be because youth might be better able to recognize unhealthy behaviors and report them after participating in these HMRE programs, or it could be due to a combination of both of those factors. And lastly, we found that some youth ended unhealthy relationships between the start and the end of the program. So between 17 and 25% of youth clients ended a physically or emotionally unhealthy or abusive relationship by the end of the program. And just generally, almost all clients reported that the program helped them, some at 43% or a lot at 53%. And these youth reported that they learned new skills in the program to use in their relationships, and that they were confident in their ability to use the knowledge and the skills that they learned. Okay, so now to take a step back, we'll talk a bit about some of the highlights from the grantees' local evaluations of their programs. So a subset of the HMRE grantees that served youth conducted local evaluations. So one grantee conducted a descriptive evaluation to provide a deep dive into questions of interest to that program, including exploring the implementation of the program, participation in services, and program recruitment and engagement. 3 grantees conducted an impact evaluation. So an impact evaluation is one that's designed to answer questions about the effects of the programs on clients' outcomes. And this kind of evaluation can tell us what changes, if any, are occurring for clients as a direct result of participating in the program. I just want to note before presenting these findings that the grantees that conducted local evaluations are not necessarily representative of the 2015 cohort of grantees or HMRE programs in general. And these evaluations were designed to address research questions that were of particular interest to these local programs. So the one descriptive evaluation of an HMRE program for youth examined research questions related to participant recruitment and engagement. They particularly emphasized the challenges associated with engaging youth clients that were coming from low-income households or experiencing challenges like homelessness or foster care. More generally, this grantee found a drop-off in program engagement over the course of their workshop series. So they measured that about 78% of youth clients attended at least one healthy relationships workshop, but only 41% completed at least 80% of the full workshop series. So this just indicates the importance of engaging youth over the course of the program. Moving on to the impact evaluations. Just generally, these evaluations found few to no effects of HMRE programs for youth on outcomes like relationship quality, attitudes and behaviors, or confidence and relationship skills. These programs also didn't find effects on financial or emotional well-being among youth. But just generally, there's not a lot of existing evidence on the impacts of HMRE programs on youth clients specifically. So these local evaluations are doing important work to build that evidence base in this area, and it'll be important to continue to learn about these programs moving forward. So as Chris alluded to in the last session, we have a lot of resources if you'd like more information on these grantees and their clients. So we have a set of 3 reports on the cross-site findings for the RF, HMRE adult, and HMRE youth grantees, as well as a technical appendix with further detail. And we'll also be publishing a digital interactive snapshots for each of these populations. And if you'd like more information on any of these products, please check the website of the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation. And if you'd like more information on these local evaluations of HMRE programs, the full text of each of these reports is available on OFA's website that's linked here. And now I'll pass it over to Matthew to start our panel discussion.
Great, thank you, Leah. And again, my name is Matthew Stange. I'm from Mathematica, and I've been part of the FaMLE cross-site team for the past 6 years. And now for the HM youth programs, we have another great panel here for discussing the findings on youth clients and healthy marriage programs. And I'll begin by introducing our panel. First is Tiffany Clark, who is a program manager at Youth Services at Bethany Christian Services based in Grand Rapids, Michigan. She brings a wealth of experience in youth programs, including helping incubate a community center that serves over 500 youth annually with opportunities often not available to marginalized youth. Next is Jackie Parker, who is the Executive Director for Strong Families, Strong Wyoming, an organization that provides relationship classes, community support services, and comprehensive economic self-sufficiency services aimed at assisting teens to make good future relationship decisions and reducing Wyoming's incidence of divorce. Parker has nearly 10 years of experience working to educate and empower youth in achieving their future success under the HMRF initiatives. And next we have Mary Ann Slanina. Mary Ann is the program manager at Youth and Family Services, an organization that provides programs and services to more than 14,000 children and families in western South Dakota that focuses on building healthy relationships and financial wellness. She joined the organization in 2016 after retiring from a teaching career of 28 years. She was hired as a youth educator and in January 2020 became the program manager. And lastly is Ani Yazdian, who serves as Associate Provost at Illinois State University. Prior to this role, she served as Chair of the Department of Family and Consumer Sciences. In 2013, she was awarded the designation of University Professor. Her current research interests focus on evidence-based practice and adolescent development. She most recently served as the principal investigator and project director on a 5-year, $5.19 million grant from the Department of Health and Human Services Administration for Children and Families to implement the Champaign Area Relationship Education for Youth, or Care for You program, which provides over 200 at-risk youth per year, ages 15 to 24, with relationship education, as well as job readiness and financial management skills to enhance their well-being and support their successful transition to adulthood. So that's our panel, and to kick off our discussion, I would like to ask each of the panelists to share their overarching perspectives on the findings from the HM Youth programs. And I'd like to start with Tiffany. In your view, what have we learned and what information confirmed what you already knew about the HM Youth programs, and what information might have surprised you?
Thanks for having me today. So overall, I found that a lot of our program findings were really consistent with the ones overall. A lot of our participants showed high satisfaction with their programs. They showed that they really liked the staff and felt connectivity in relationships. But what was interesting is we didn't have phenomenally changed outcomes, especially when you ask young people about their opinions around marriage and relationships. Even kind of on the long term, their attitudes towards marriage and healthy relationships showed little change over time. But what was really interesting is that we still saw behavioral changes. So we saw a reduced negative behaviors in school, and we saw an increase in young people's not only ability, but performance in conflict resolution skills. And so this data, and I can talk about this more a bit later, really educated the perspective in which we have taken to programming that we have developed after these learnings to integrate some of the things that we have found. But overall, some consistencies, but I think once you dig in a little bit deeper, you find a lot of the positive impacts.
Great, thanks. And Jackie, would you like to share next what your overall reactions to the findings, what information you confirmed what you already knew, or anything surprising?
Yeah, thank you for having me as a panelist. I appreciate this opportunity. I think similar to Tiffany, a lot of the stuff in the report was really representative of our program. I think, as the panelists said in the previous session, the numbers were pretty incredible to me, over 66,000 students that we reached. And I think we'll probably never, I think there's probably a farther reach. We'll never really know. We have students telling us that they talk to their friends about it, you know, outside of class, or their mom. Another example was we had a FCCLA group that did their whole project on teen dating violence, where they held a statewide assembly. And so I just think that kids learning this information and then sharing it with their friends and family is a farther reach than we'll ever be able to really know. One thing that stood out to me, but I guess not necessarily surprised me, was the students reporting that they ended the unhealthy relationships. The data was similar to the data that we collected in our own program. We had about 30% reported ending emotionally unhealthy relationships, and then another 20% saying they ended a physically unhealthy relationship. And that every time we, reported those figures, it always kind of shocked me that so many students are in those unhealthy relationships, but also thinking about our program and its impacts, that students don't really know what relationships look like at their age. And so being able to learn and recognize those unhealthy behaviors and then be able to actually navigate them and safely get out of them is something that I'm proud of. We're making an impact.
Great. And Mary Ann, would you like to share your overarching thoughts?
I'd be happy to. Hello, everyone. It's an honor to be here. As Matthew said, I was hired as a youth educator. So I was in the trenches teaching relationship education for 4 years, which is so challenging and yet has so many opportunities to inspire students for growth. Then the last year of the grant, I was asked to be the program manager, and I think that wearing those two different hats has really been beneficial for me to see both sides of how this program benefits youth. It was great for me to see that last slide where most students overwhelmingly said that they got a lot or somewhat information about or were benefited. I think that really reaffirms what we're doing is not only meaningful, relevant, but well received with youth. And I think Jackie just said, you know, youth are seeking information. There's so many negative influences right now with social media, TV, music, and just a lack of adult role models that they know something is not right. They just don't know how to navigate out of those. So, yeah.
Great, thank you. And Ani, would you like to share?
Sure, I'll just add a couple of things, just echoing what the prior participants said, both in this session, but also the prior panelists, but really amplifying what Jackie said about students wanting to know about what healthy relationships look like. And some of the things that we did in our own project was to ask them about their knowledge of healthy relationships as well. Rather than looking specifically at attitudes or behavioral change, we also started with knowledge, and then we were able to see the pre and post changes in that. But then the other thing that really stuck out to me that hasn't been mentioned yet is the importance of the partnerships with the schools. A lot of the youth programs were already taking place in schools. And so obviously, those programs already have those partnerships, but maybe looking at the quality of those partnerships and seeing if that somehow impacts how the program is able to function, the number of youth they're able to serve, because the better those relationships are, then the school personnel are going to be invested in the program and are going to help with recruitment and are going to help with getting students there. And in fact, in our most successful sites, we were more closely integrated in the schools than the ones where perhaps we weren't as integrated. So really just also nurturing the school program partnerships.
Great, that's very interesting perspectives here. So I just kind of want to open it up to the group for some other questions. So the study showed that youth participation in services typically spanned 5 weeks. How is this consistent with the planned services of your programs, and do you think this is an optimal timeframe to engage youth in HMR programming? And maybe Jackie, you'd like to take that one first?
Sure. We partnered with over 30 teachers in schools or community-based programs throughout the grant cycle, and they all held the workshops on a different schedule. And our dosage and our curriculum ranged from 10 to 15 hours. And so a lot of that depended on which curriculum they were using and how long it was on how long the span of the workshops went. We had some that covered it in the course of 5 weeks. We had some that did over a semester, and we even had some that did it over a year-long schedule. And we noticed that the shorter timeframes did allow for more completion, and it also allowed for more data collection as more post-surveys were being able to be completed. For example, like our partnering teacher that taught it over the course of the school year, by the time she taught it, her intention was to teach it every Friday, and sometimes that never happened or didn't happen. And then by the time we got to the end of the school year, she was rushing to get it done, and then students were gone. And then interestingly, yesterday, we just administered post surveys with a partnering teacher, and she made the comment, she started the end of August and finished earlier this week, so about a 5-week time span. And while our team was there, she made the comment that she felt like she needed to make changes to her schedule going forward. She said she felt rushed trying to get it all in, and she also felt like the students needed more time to absorb that information. It's almost like an information overload for the students, and so that really, it struck me yesterday when that came up because of today's forum, but also thought about future studies that we could look at internally on, is there an impact in outcomes based on the length of the schedule.
If I could just jump in. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Matthew.
Oh, no, I was just going to say I saw a lot of nodding among the panelists, so if you would like to add to that, please go ahead, Annie.
Sure, I was just gonna kind of echo what Jackie was just saying. Our program was actually ran the length of a school year, and so we had a lot of discussions about should it be shorter, should it be longer, but we felt like the other thing, we had professional providers coming into the schools once a week, and so one of the things that we felt strongly about was that that was another adult that our youth could connect with, and so we felt like in addition to the curriculum knowledge that they were gaining, they were also able to develop a relationship over time with another adult who could serve as a resource, who could affirm them and listen to them. And in fact, with our focus groups, that is one of the things that we heard a lot is, you know, even though we were also still in schools, the students would say they felt like our sessions were different from classes because they had an opportunity to speak and be heard. So it is an interesting question going back to the prior session as well about the dosage versus with youth, the additional kind of intangible of the relationship that the youth get to develop with the provider.
I'd like to echo that. Every single school we were in was different. It looked different. The times varied, but what we found is that when we were in a classroom for either 2 days or 3 days a week, we had a much better rapport with the students rather than the ones we were with once a week. We just never felt, and we were in on a Friday class too. And we just, you know, Fridays, there were snow days, there were vacation days, and we just really struggled with that rapport building with those groups.
Our work was community-based, and we quickly found that 85% of our young people that were in the 16 hours of curricula were electing to be in additional activities. And so there was definitely this like want from the young people to stay connected to the facilitators. And so we have a workforce development component where young people can complete the curricula, and if they complete it at 100%, they're able to engage in a work experience where there is a stipend provided. But what we saw was since young people were reporting, like you guys have heard, that they didn't have romantic relationships yet, or they weren't using the skills in these romantic relationships, we saw that young people were implementing the skills in the workforce setting and then also at home in other relationships. And so I know that like long term, it's really difficult to measure behavior, especially when we're serving high risk populations. But what you can control or what you can measure on the shorter term is some of those attitude pieces to see if those perspectives are changing and if they're able to make the connection between the content they're learning in the classroom and the application of those skills in the workforce. And then we had case managers going and visiting them at the job site in live time, helping them do some conflict resolution with their employer and work through some opportunities to grow through skills instead of just getting fired like you would if you weren't supported through a program like this. And so lots of young people took advantage of that, as well as kind of ancillary events down the road, which gave us a good opportunity to ensure we got all of our pre-tests in or our post-tests. Yeah.
Great. And so in the presentation, Leah shared that while youth generally reported that the programs helped a lot, youth's expectations for their future relationships and parenting were generally stable. And she shared that youth reported more unhealthy relationship behaviors at program exit than they did at entry. Based on your own experience, what do you think is driving these findings that we're seeing here at program exit?
I'm happy to jump in to start. I think some of it was mentioned as well, but you know, we were exposing students to new kinds of information that they hadn't identified at first walking into the program, what a healthy relationship might look like. You know, students are coming from family systems and contexts where certain behaviors are normative, even if they're not healthy. And so going into the program, they might have thought, as has been mentioned in the prior session, that this was just how it is, and then they find out in the program that these are not perhaps the most healthy behaviors. But I think some of that then is the challenge that students face, especially for us when we were working with individual youth, is they would go home and try that with a partner, but then the partner wasn't receptive. And I had that experience with a prior program as well in Texas, where, you know, they would say, well, I'm going home and my partner's saying, what's wrong with you? Why are you acting so weird? And using these weird I statements, you know. So I think that sometimes that can be a little demoralizing for youth who really are trying to change their behaviors, but then they realize just how the systems in which they live, and this is true for all of us, right? They want to kind of stay the same. most systems are not super interested in changing, and so just that youth participating can be a little challenging.
And I think too, from my perspective, youth coming into the classes thought, well, if a relationship works, it works, and if it doesn't, it doesn't, and there's really nothing you can do about it. And, you know, post-survey showed that given the tools, they can make a difference. They can change those behaviors and make the relationship work if it's workable, and if not, get out.
Sorry, if I can just jump in. I know a couple of people probably want to also comment, but we didn't have a control group or a comparison group, but we did do a retrospective pre-post survey because we thought that students would overestimate their abilities to, you know, coming into the program. And we did find that that was the case, when, especially also in focus groups, when we would ask students, they would say, oh, I thought I knew how to do this, but now I realize, or I thought I knew what a healthy relationship looked like. So I think that there is value, like with what we talked about before, about the retrospective question.
I really like the curricula components too, where young people are empowered to find that inherent dignity and skill and talent and whatever those things are, and realize that the definition of who you are as a young person doesn't just have to be tied to your hormones and who you like and trying to explore sexuality. Like, of course, that's a huge part of it, but learning how to love yourself and learning who you are is really the first step. And I don't think that that message is always getting through to them. And so I think that having some core content curricula that is kind of delivering that helps them work through this, like, oh yeah, you're right, I'm not defined by who I'm in a relationship with. I can be my own person.
And, you know, similar to what Ani said, is just they're overestimating their abilities or understanding of these skills before they start the class, and then learning that, no, maybe they did not recognize it or understand it as well as they thought they did. But for us, we also looked at kind of the logistics of the N-Form survey itself. You know, did the students not understand the survey questions, or were they distracted when they were completing the survey? And so we worked to insist that they wore headphones to limit those distractions. Some students really just weren't paying attention. You know, when we're administering the surveys, you can kind of just see them just hitting the buttons just to complete it. And so we really tried to strengthen our script to introduce the surveys, to emphasize the importance of completing it honestly and to the best of their ability. So we kind of looked at more of some of those other logistical points of the survey itself too.
And did you find positive impacts from those changes that you tried, Jackie?
To be honest, no, we didn't really have a whole lot of data to, you know, a lot of kids still didn't want to use the headphones. We tried to look at that by certain site locations, and so we didn't really get great data, honestly, from a lot of those other variables outside of their just not having the background knowledge or lack of information. So
great. And so another thing we saw with the descriptive evaluations that there were challenges to recruiting and engaging youth from low-income households and those experiencing homelessness and foster care. Based on your own experiences, what are the most significant barriers to engaging youth facing these circumstances? And have you tried any strategies to try to recruit and engage youth from low-income households or those experiencing homelessness or foster care? And maybe start with Tiffany. I know you work with youth in the community, out and not schools like the other programs. So start with you.
We have really great recruitment, and I give that up to our incredible direct care staff that is diverse and that has been committed to our young people and to our mission for so long and has deep and meaningful relationships in the community. I know you asked about barriers, but we haven't really had significant barriers because we are so intentional about maintaining and loving those relationships. I think it's all about connectivity, right? And so we're deeply connected with the foster care agencies and try to stay up to date on following the trends, right? So in our community, I think we serve like 60% African Americans. We have a solid number of foster youth as well. And like a trend that we were seeing was that there wasn't a lot of urban foster care homes, and so our foster care youth were being sent out into more rural settings, right? And so like, if we know that and that's who we're trying to serve, how do we help with the transportation barrier, or how do we help deliver that content to them even though they're in this transition or transient setting? And so I would say that probably is my answer though to your question. The biggest barrier is that the young people are constantly moving, right? And the biggest protective factor for that is relationships. Like if they can find a case manager that is non-judgmental and the young people can drop in anytime that they need to and just show up as they are, and know that they're going to be greeted unconditional positive regard, I think that's the thing that's going to keep them kind of bouncing back to us. But it doesn't always mean that they're going to go to 12 hours of curricula in a row. And so I think removing as many barriers as you can and trying to meet them where they're at in order to help them finish that. Oh, Ruth just put a comment in too. They're just so out of their vision. She works in our program as well. But yes, I think that there is really significant barriers to that population, but I'm really glad that it continues to be a priority for this programming.
Great. And would the others like to jump in with, I know your programs are more based in schools, but have you found any ways to address the challenges of reaching these harder to reach youth populations?
So for us, we needed to eliminate those barriers by providing transportation when necessary, a light snack or a light meal, childcare when appropriate for those single parents. And one thing that we struggled to figure out is that our incentives, if we gave incentives, had to be meaningful. Meaning, like, I can give you an Amazon gift card, but if you don't have Prime, you're paying shipping and all those other costs. So it's really not meaningful. So we really had to ask, what is meaningful to you? And for students on the Pine Ridge Reservation, they wanted new shoes. I mean, that's a basic fundamental. They needed new shoes and that's what they wanted. So for us to shift and think, well, gosh, everyone wants an Amazon gift card was really eye-opening for us that no, that's not the case.
Wow. And Ani? Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to give an example of where we weren't able to overcome the barriers. I know you're asking about that, but I think sometimes it's important to know our program targeted at-risk youth. Many of them did come from low-income and under-resourced households, but we initially partnered with an adult education program, and we ended up having to end that partnership because we also have to understand that that is not a homogeneous group. There's a lot of heterogeneity when you're talking about low-income or at-risk or whatever broad term that you use. And we realized we couldn't effectively serve those students, even though we tried, because those students couldn't even make it to school, to the adult education program, and we were the last thing on their minds. So in contrast to Tiffany's program that, it seems like they figured out how to do that, and their program is set up in such a way that they can develop those relationships. Those students weren't even coming to school because they had other concerns about where am I going to sleep, what am I going to eat, and so getting them into our program at that point, we just had to realize that we weren't going to be able to provide enough supports to get those students, because if you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, those students were thinking about very different things. We provided transportation, we provided food, we provided incentives, but it was not one of their priorities at that time. Not that they weren't interested, but there were much bigger demands in their lives that we just couldn't compete against.
And Jackie, what has been your experience with challenges of reaching harder to reach youth populations, ways you've maybe addressed those challenges?
For us, it's very similar to what Marianne already shared. For our target at-risk populations, our teen parents and low-income, transportation was a big barrier. And so we would make sure we offered bus tokens or taxi cab rides. For our parenting teens, childcare obviously was always a barrier for them. And so we provided on-site childcare with one of our local alternative high schools, and sometimes food insecurity. And so it's similar, we offered light snacks and beverages. And honestly, even if that wasn't a barrier, the food is kind of the way to these teens' hearts. So it was always a plus to have some snacks available. But those were my top three as well as Marianne.
Great. And so in the data, we saw that youth typically did not participate in a lot of individual service contacts. I know, Tiffany, you mentioned some about using a way to keep youth engaged in your programs, but we saw kind of overall that individual services contacts didn't make up a large part of the services for youth programs. So just curious, based on all of your experience, how do you think individual services fit into the package of programming that HM youth programs can provide?
I think that if you can set your budget up in a way that you have the staffing for it, it's really important. So statistically, we saw a correlation between youth attendance and how many outreach or case management contacts that they had outside of class. And so how we set it up was our facilitators were required to have 2 contacts a month outside of class with young people for anybody that was in active programming. And so they were able, I think, to let the youth know that they were cared about, but also, you know, troubleshoot any barriers that young people are having, not only to program participation, but also to any of the goals that they have set for themselves. And I think the youth felt connected and cared about, and it really helped us with retention and connectivity. And I don't think that that has to fit in a box for what that case management looks like. I mean, it could be group case management. It could be, you know, ancillary pro-social events where we have young people in a healthy environment with young teens that are, or with healthy adults that are able to engage in something that's not the core curricula, right, but allows them to explore again who they are and what some of their hobbies are in a really healthy setting that just further keeps them connected to your organization and the messaging that you're providing.
Great. And what are the others' perspectives on how individual services might fit into the programming for youth?
So this was something that we were surprised about because we set up our program so that our facilitators would provide those contacts, but we realized that many of our youth already had those connections in the school setting. Because we were in school, they had counselors, there were social workers, there were family liaisons, and many of these students had already been identified as being at risk potentially by the school. So there were pre-existing relationships between youth and adults in the school setting that the youth turned to our facilitators for relationship assistance, but in many of these other instances would often go to their school personnel.
And that's the exact experience that we had, that we just felt that we were possibly overreaching or overserving youth. So we let those school personnel take that role.
So
Yeah,
specifically,
go ahead.
Where our district is, our most kind of urban, highest poverty high school is currently staffed. I don't know if any of you guys are experiencing this on the call, but it's currently staffed at 70% substitutes because they're having a really hard time keeping full-time instructors. And in Kent County, Michigan, where we're at, the average foster care turnover is 5 to 6 months that they're getting new foster care workers. And so as much as I hate to say it, but programs like this can be the staple for young people when they have adults that are supposed to be more permanent coming in and out of their lives. And so we did see young people kind of gravitate towards our facilitators because we are able to have that staff retention for 4 or 5 years during this grant. And so you like watch them kind of grow up and navigate different services that we have to offer. But yeah, I agree with you. The social workers, the counselors, like the community is set up for them to be able to rely on that person. But where we're at, we have so much transition.
Yeah, and similar to what's already been said, we worked in traditional high schools and community-based programs that really already had their own systems of care in place and provided a range of comprehensive services. And so for case management, we really focused our efforts on more of our parenting teams in the alternative high schools. And they, you know, did individualized development plan and a youth needs survey to identify their barriers. And it was actually our partnering teachers who they had already developed a rapport with and who got to see them on more of a daily basis that were the ones actually administering it to them and working with them on those different services. And for those here in Laramie County in Cheyenne, where we're headquartered, they actually had the opportunity. Another piece of it was to enroll in technical training that I don't think would have been an opportunity for them otherwise if it wasn't for our program. So
Great, great. So now we want to turn to questions from the audience, and we've gotten a couple in, but just want to remind everyone that if you do have questions, please submit them through the chat and select all panelists to send your question to, and we'll try to get to as many as we can in the time that we have here. First, we did get a question in about whether copies of the slides would be available. And later this fall, we'll release the materials from the forum and the reports with these findings and a lot more. And everything will be posted on OPRE's website when they are available. Another question that we have for the panelists is, how have programs providers practice self-care? Maybe they're talking now during the pandemic, but perhaps you have some other examples from before the pandemic that you'd like to share as well. So I can open it up. Maybe Marianne, you'd like to go first?
Sure. So, you know, self-care is important. We know that. We teach in one high school, Douglas High School, and we teach every 9th grade student in their school. So it's fast and it's furious. So we always make sure that when we are in that school, it's only 3 days a week. So our educators have time to decompress, refresh, re-energize. Building that into those educator schedules is really important when they're on the go.
And Jackie, how have you helped program providers practice self-care?
I love this question. So for our program, our staff does not provide direct services. We partner with teachers in the schools to provide services and provide the curriculum instruction. And so they're really the ones with the boots on the ground. And so we know that we need to nurture those relationships and we need to support them as best as we can. And during the last grant, we've got a really creative staff member. She created these healthy relationship crates, which is similar to like a subscription box that you would order, you know, but we curate it and develop it and send it out to our teachers. And it's just full of a lot of tools and supplies to help promote self-care for them. So an example was in our last box, we sent out, like, there's a theme for everyone, but like a shower bomb, like you put in the shower and you breathe in these wonderful smells and it just kind of is relaxing for you. So that's just one example. And then it also comes with a lot of different resources. And so it's just promoting self-care for our teachers to help them take care of themselves. So I appreciate that question.
Great, that was a really nice practical examples. And Ani, do you have examples from your experience?
Sure. I think we really addressed it more in more an indirect way, where we really tried to develop a sense of community among the facilitators and the program staff. And so we would do events, not using our federal funds because the funds fund, but we would use other dollars to really do things, you know, some team building events every once in a while. Sometimes our project manager would take everybody out to lunch and they would go and just talk about things unrelated to work. One time we did an escape room, you know, we did a painting experience so that people can have a sense that they can rely on each other as human beings and really share some of the challenges that they're facing. And then we also provided opportunities during our meetings for people to reflect on the challenges they were having. And then really our program manager was the person who worked directly with our staff to encourage them to take the time they needed to take care of themselves, et cetera, but really developing a culture of care among our staff so that then they can provide care to our participants.
Great. And Tiffany, would you like to chime in on how you may have supported program staff in self-care?
Yeah, this is great. What the things the panelists talked about. I think building that culture of a community is really important. We have a 2-day offsite coming up. It's at a camp. It's voluntary, but it has all sorts of archery and hiking, and there will be some content too. And so just how do you take the time to build a positive relationship together? During the pandemic, we did a lot of porch drops. And so just do a gift bag on your staff's porch. That was kind of a nice thing to open the door and see. Just try to stay connected as much as we can.
Can I add one more thing? I think it's really important to debrief, you know, with your staff after, if you can, after each experience, but that's not always necessary. But that if you do need to pivot, that you listen to those pivots, and if you can make those changes, for the staff who are doing this.
Great, great. And we have one more question that came in. They have many enrolled fathers, but can't seem to get them to participate in their classes. What do you think they might be able to try to get them to come to their classes? So it sounds like they have young fathers who they're trying to serve, and they're having challenges getting them to come to their classes. From your experiences, do you have any suggestions of things they might try?
For us, this was something very similar that we found, and I was looking at the report and the characteristics when it was fairly split between male and female, and that was the same for us overall. But when we really started looking at taking a closer look at specific target populations, our parenting teen population, as an example, there was a drastic difference in the moms versus the dads that were enrolling, about 90% being the moms and only 10% being the dads. And so we really took that as an opportunity to strategize and try to pilot opportunities to engage and enroll those dads. We actually we went and talked with the teen moms directly and surveyed them to see if their child's other parent would be interested in joining programming, either together or by themselves. We had the teachers at the schools help us advertise. We held an orientation session. And finally, we were able to, we held healthy relationship classes over two intensive weekends. And then we also held small group sessions on a bi-weekly basis just for the dads to get some mentoring and just kind of talk about things that were important to them at the time. We didn't get to do this for too long because then COVID hit and that kind of put a quick halt to everything. So it started off well. We had a small group of dads actually joining us, not a large group, but a couple of them did. And so I guess you can call that a success in some ways. And I wish we had more time last grant before COVID to really amplify that, but some possible suggestions.
Great suggestions. And does anyone else have any other suggestions or experiences you've had with engaging young fathers in your programs?
In our Care for You program, we didn't necessarily work with pregnant and parenting teens, but in a prior program in Texas, we did. And in some of those, we gave the young fathers, kind of like Jackie said, an opportunity to meet together with a male facilitator, just so that they could develop a sense of rapport. Because one of the things that we noticed is that we may have had some men, but we had far more females in the group. So then that can be a little, that can make parenting dads a little uncomfortable when you have a room full of women and they're talking about my baby daddy this or that, and then they're there and perhaps they're seen as representing all baby daddies or all men. And so to provide those opportunities for the young men to meet with other young men, especially with a male facilitator. But I know not every program can do that.
We've had the most success when partnering with another organization that has something of value. And so we've provided the curricula within a GED and vocational training program that was already well attended by that demographic. And we also partnered with an organization that was doing a financial literacy training that was giving out some direct dollars for parents who were attending that financial literacy training. And so we were able to kind of piggyback on that and engage some of them. And so I feel like you got to find what they want to do and try to partner with it.
Great. And so now I'd like to hear how all of you might use the data from the analyses across the grantees from the upcoming reports. How they might inform your plans for current or future programming. So Marianne, would you like to start?
Absolutely. So we are fortunate that we were awarded the next round of funding. So we are actually using this data for future programming, for strategic planning, with our CQI, our continuous quality improvement efforts, to figure out what worked, what didn't work, so we can continue to provide those services moving forward.
And Ani, how do you plan to use the analysis from across the grantees?
I think it was very illustrative. You know, I really appreciate having the opportunity to review it. And I would suggest that this is something that's very useful to the 2020 cohort, to be able to get that even partway through the program, because then you can see how your work kind of aligns with other work that is already happening. I think it's just another example of, as Marianne said, continuous quality improvement, using the data that is in front of you to really close the loop, to look at what practices you know to be working, how does that compare with other practices across other grantees, because that's going to help you identify areas to tweak.
And Jackie, would you like to add in?
Yep. Yeah, similar to what Dave said, I think reading the report actually brought out some more questions that I would like to take a better look or an in-depth look at, as far as like, is there an ideal dosage needed to achieve improved results or outcomes? Or what, as I talked about before, what is the optimal length of a workshop to achieve those outcomes? And then I also thought about looking at, do our outcomes differ by our facilitators? We have a number of different facilitators, and our outcomes differing, and if they are, and you know, why is that, and what does that look like? So I think this report provided just additional opportunities to look more closely at different programming aspects.
Yeah, and that's a great point. You've come up with some new research questions that could build on the current report. I guess I'll open it up to the others. What kind of new research questions do these findings spur for you, and future directions and new data that would be helpful to collect on youth HM programs?
Our findings from the last cohort made us want to dive really deeply into social emotional learning and being able to measure if young people are getting a change in attitude that can predict their long-term change in behavior. So that was something that we looked at. And then also I wanted to mention for the last question, I think these publications are particularly interesting when looking for grantees while they're looking for funding, just to stay kind of abreast of where the field is at, and also where the gaps are and where the government is paying attention and wants to put additional research in, and then comparing kind of where you're at as an organization with that, and being able to say like, hey, do we think we can contribute something to this this gap in the field of research, or how do we stack up when it comes to the outcomes that other people are finding?
Internally, we're looking at sessions that we're delivering. We're really doing a deep dive into why did one session go off so well and another one didn't. You know, was it the school? Was it the student? So internally, we're looking to see what factors involve that.
I have 5 things. I'll go really quickly. You know, I think one of the things that we've talked about in the first session now, and I'm sure it's going to come up again, is we work with our clients, our participants, and we know that the programs are working. And so what is it about the questions that we're asking? How can we, and I don't have the solution, but how can we tweak the questions to really pick up on the changes that our participants are saying they are experiencing? I think a couple of things that we did look at that, you know, could potentially be enhanced or expanded is readiness to change, right? So that might explain why some people, you see some gains, because they're already coming in with a greater desire or proclivity toward change than others. And then also hope. If you're trying to change, do you have a sense of hope that there is something lying ahead of you or not? And does that impact, you know, how people approach the program? For us who worked with youth, you know, is there a way to measure the support of the family or the impact of the family, the role of the family, in then how a student or a participant absorbs the information that they're hearing and their willingness to actually make changes? And then finally, as a qualitative researcher, you know, I always want to hear from the students or the participants directly. And is there a way on a very large scale to integrate some of that qualitative data and those narratives in a systematic way so that it's not just anecdotal, but really provides kind of that additional lens in terms of what the work the programs are doing?
Yeah, and I'm just curious if any of the other panelists are using qualitative or collecting any qualitative data on your programs, and how that's kind of you know, augmenting kind of these quantitative measures that we've reported on here and that you've also analyzed for your programs.
We collect information in our focus groups that are so valuable. When you get a group of parents together and you're just all ears and let them tell you the good, the bad, and the ugly, it's such a great way to be able to grow. We also survey our community partners. We also have a separate focus group with our youth employers. And so the information that comes out of these reports, it's great. I love it.
We
And
collect,
Marianne,
sorry.
no,
Go
go
No,
ahead.
I
ahead,
was
Jackie.
just gonna say I agree.
And I think that's where we get a lot of really great data for our CQI process is qualitative data from our partnering teachers. And one thing that I don't think we did very well last cohort, but are definitely making strides this go around is involving the youth and getting their feedback on what's working and what they liked. And we also plan on doing some knowledge-based survey questions, and which we tried last go around and it didn't work out too well. We did get some feedback that 3 of the 4 questions that we asked in our knowledge-based survey actually improved. There was improvement, and so we're going to continue doing that. And then we're also developing quizzes. We've had teachers request more immediate access to learning outcomes, and so we're developing quizzes based on the lessons, and we are going to work with some of our teachers to gain access to those to see how students are responding, which I think will be pretty interesting. Observations are always really great learning tools too.
Great, great. And we are at time for our session here, so I want to thank our 4 panelists for a wonderful discussion and Leah for the presentation of the HM Youth findings. We do have a break now before we come back for the responsible fatherhood findings.
We are glad to have you. And if you've been with us on the other sessions, we are so glad that you stayed. My name is Sarah Avalar. I am with Mathematica, and I am going to start us off on the Responsible Fatherhood panel. I'm going to wait just a moment for our slides to come up. Sorry about that. All right, maybe I can share my slides up that I have. Try that. Okay. Can somebody give me a signal that you can see my slides?
Enter your access code or meeting number followed by
Thank
pound.
you. And could everybody go on mute if you, thank you. Great. Okay, let's get there. Let me just start this off. Okay, sorry about that. Oh, goodness. There we go. It's a little bit of a delay. So we're
2, 4, 1, 2.
Sorry, somebody's having some technical difficulties. Now my slides are taking a while to come up. Why don't I just start talking? So,
Welcome
Responsible Fatherhood.
Enter your access code or meeting number followed by pound.
Leah, is there any way we could mute others?
Yes,
Okay,
we're
so
working on that now. Sarah, your slides should be showing now, and
they are.
Okay.
Okay. So should I just keep going?
Welcome
yes.
to WebEx.
And
enter your access code.
okay. All right, Sarah, you should be
Sorry about
outside
that.
now.
Enter your attendee ID.
Okay, so why don't I start with the background on responsible fatherhood programs? So fatherhood is so important. Children tend to do better when they are supported emotionally and financially by their fathers. That holds for a range of outcomes, from academic to behavioral and other developmental outcomes. And importantly, this is true whether or not children live with their fathers. So it's not just that residential fathers are important. Somebody's telling me they can't hear. Are other people having this problem? Okay, others can hear. All right. Goodness, lots of difficulties this last session. Okay, so it's not just residential fathers that provide this important support, but fathers often can't provide the financial support and the emotional support that they'd like to. They may not have the resources, they may not have access to the children, they may not have the parenting skills that they need. And this is what responsible fatherhood programs are designed to do. They are really trying to work to help fathers fulfill their roles that they want to be the parent, the provider, and the partner that they are striving to be. Responsible fatherhood programs that are funded by ACF are required to offer 3 types of services. So the first is healthy relationships, and that could be a relationship like a romantic relationship with a partner. It could also be a co-parenting relationship where the partners are not necessarily involved with each other, but they are raising a child together. The programs must also offer parenting services such as knowledge of child development, parenting skills and behaviors, and economic stability services such as employment or help with financial planning. So like the other presentations today, we are focusing on our 2015 cohort of grantees. That was 40 responsible fatherhood programs that received a 5-year grant in September 2015. So they just wrapped up not too long ago. And again, we're relying on the performance measure data that the grantees collected and reported to ACF. And so broadly speaking, there are 2 types of this data. One is provided directly from the grantees. They answer questions about their program operations every quarter. They give information about the services that they're providing through the grant. And then the other data, the other class of data is client surveys. So the clients are answering these questions directly. And there are up to 3 surveys that each client would take as they progress through the program. So the first is an applicant characteristic survey, which they usually take at enrollment, which is often the first contact they have with the program. Then there's the entrance survey, which they will take at their first workshop. And then there's the exit survey that they take at their last workshop. Or if the workshop is fairly short, they would take it 28 days after the entrance survey. So the length of time between the entrance and the exit survey is at least 28 days. All right, so let's turn to some of our results. So as we've talked about with the other programs, recruitment is a challenge. It's very difficult to do. It's an ongoing process, and responsible fatherhood programs are no exception. We found that pretty much every program has to use multiple methods in order to recruit enough fathers into their programs. So you can see on this slide that every grantee did on-site recruitment at community agencies. So that's where they might, an RF staff person might go to the agency and try to directly engage with potential clients, find out if they're eligible, try to interest them in the services. And virtually every program, 98%, also received referrals from community agencies. So that's when the community agency is reaching out to the potential client and then providing information to the RF program about people who might be interested in and eligible for the program. Almost all of the programs also did what we're calling street outreach. This is going into the community where people are and trying to tell them about the program. So for example, we know some of the RF programs did street outreach on buses. They did it in barbershops, basketball courts, so places where fathers were, and they were often very creative at finding where the fathers might be congregating. Most of the programs also did phone or mail, and 70% did something else as well. So you can see that there are a lot of activities that were required to recruit fathers for the program. I think these partnerships with the community agencies, though, were really central to the recruitment effort. So as we said, all of the programs did on-site recruitment. Almost all of them received referrals. And you can see here that the on-site recruitment, the programs worked with 9 organizations on average, and they received referrals from 11 organizations on average. So they were creating pretty large networks to identify potential clients for their programs. Our programs enrolled more than 64,000 people in the 4 years for which we have data. We have them, we call them populations. We have 3 populations that we classified the clients in. By far, our largest group are what we call community fathers. There were 45,000 community fathers who were enrolled. So these were men who were in the community and receiving services in the community. Our middle group is much smaller. These were clients in community couples. There were about 3,000 of those clients. So these were, some programs did serve, for example, a mother and father together in the program. So they would fall in the community couple group. And then our last group is what we call reentering fathers. We had over 16,000 of them. And these were fathers who were either incarcerated when they were enrolled, but expected to be released within 3 to 9 months, or they had been recently released up to 6 months earlier. We asked the fathers why they enrolled in the program to find out what was their motivation for engaging in services. And by far, the most common reason was to learn to be a better parent. Maybe that's not surprising. These are called responsible fatherhood programs. But you can see in the green, the dark green area of these pie charts, that was our biggest, that was the most common response. 48% of community fathers and 58% of reentering fathers said they primarily enrolled, or the main reason they enrolled was to learn to be a better parent. For community fathers, finding a job or a better job was also a very common reason. That was about 18% of dads. And for reentering dads, learning to improve relationships was also common, and 14% of dads said that was their main reason. And now let's turn to characteristics of some of the people who were enrolled. So we have our 2 tables here for community fathers and reentering fathers. And even though I've been calling them fathers the whole time, they weren't all men. So 86% of the community fathers and 94% of reentering fathers were male. As I said on one of the previous slides, programs could serve couples, so women might be involved because they were engaged with their partner in the services, and some programs did serve women or mothers if they were interested in receiving services. But by far, the majority of the clients were male, so I will be continuing to refer to them as fathers throughout the presentation. Most of them were in the 25 to 44-year-old age range. About 68% of community dads and 72% of reentering dads were in that age range. There was a lot of racial and ethnic diversity in the clients. Among the community dads, the largest group was African American fathers, which was about 40%. Then the next largest group was white fathers, 28%, and Latino fathers were 23%. Among the reentering dads, it was less, there was less of a range, but almost half of the clients were white. Fathers did tend to be in a romantic relationship when they enrolled in the program. That could be a marriage, it could be what we call a steady relationship, or an on-again, off-again relationship with the partner. And you can see on the bars on the far right, so it was the percentage of fathers who were not in a relationship. So it's the minority of fathers, 37% of reentering, community fathers, and 40% of reentering fathers were not in a relationship. So most were. Employment was less than half of the fathers were employed at the time they enrolled in the program. So here you can see the percentage of fathers who were employed. 46% of community fathers and 22% of reentering fathers. We also asked them about their perceived barriers to employment. So that could be things like, did they have reliable transportation? Did they have a criminal background? Did they have the right skills and education for employment? And you can see here that very few of the fathers felt they had none of these barriers. 18% of the community fathers said they had none of these job-related barriers that we asked about, and only 5% of the re-entering fathers said they had none of these barriers. So now turning to the services that they received from the program. Like our other HM programs, the two sort of big classes of services in RF programs are workshops, which are generally group sessions led by a facilitator, often following a curriculum, and what we call individual service contacts, which could be things like a case management appointment. So once people enroll in the program, they may or may not attend services. Sometimes they decide it's not for them, or things come up that interfere with their ability to participate. But by far, most of the fathers who enrolled did engage in at least one service. It was 91% of community fathers and 95% of re-entering fathers. And their duration of participation was about 6 weeks. So they were in the program about 6 weeks on average, but some of them were in the program for more than 4 years, and that's looking at, that they were still receiving services throughout the time. So some of them were engaged for quite a while. So that was their participation in any type of service. Now looking at it more in a more nuanced way, we looked at the workshops. So again, these were really the centerpiece of the program. And again, the majority of fathers did engage in at least one workshop. So 85% of the community fathers and 94% of the reentering fathers attended at least one workshop. Often they were attended much more, because the average attendance among fathers who attended at least one workshop was 24 hours. And in addition, most of the fathers did have at least one individual service contact. So again, that could be like a case management appointment. We look here only at service contacts that lasted at least 15 minutes, because we're really trying to hone in on what we think of as sort of substantive service contacts. A shorter service contact might be something like just a reminder call to tell them, oh, we have class tomorrow, we hope you show up. So these we were trying to figure out if these were sort of meaningful contacts with the fathers. And most fathers did receive a service contact of at least 15 minutes, 83% of community dads and 70% of re-entering dads. So as with our other programs, we did have these entrance and exit surveys where we could measure fathers' change over time. We know that most of the fathers enrolled in the program because they were looking for a change. As I talked about on an earlier slide, the most common reason was that they wanted to learn to be better parents. So we can see how their attitudes and behaviors changed from the beginning through the end of the program. As we've caveated before, though, I just want to mention these are not necessarily effects of the program. Change can happen for a lot of reasons. Obviously, they were enrolling in the program because many were looking for a change. They were motivated for change. And so they might have been able to change in other ways even without the services. So it's just an important caveat to keep in mind. We looked at community fathers' contact with their children, and here we're showing the percentage of fathers who saw their children in the past month. So this is looking only at their youngest children, their two youngest children, and you can see that, for example, 54% of fathers saw both of their children in the past month at enrollment, and that had increased to 60% by program exit. And conversely, 38% had not seen either of their children at enrollment, and that had declined to 33% by program exit. So there was an increase in contact with their children in the previous month. There wasn't, however, a change in the percentage of fathers who reported living with their two youngest children. And I'll just say, if a father only had one child, he would be in the both children category, because he saw all of his children as we counted them. Fathers were less likely to be in a relationship over time. Again, this is from the beginning of the program to the end. And if you look at these numbers, they actually look very stable. Most of them look the same from the beginning to the end of the program. So you might be wondering why I'm saying that. I will note that this is because of rounding. that often the change was after the decimal point. But if you can look at the last cluster of bars on the far right of our graph, the percentage of fathers who were not in a relationship did increase from beginning to end. For community fathers, that went from 41% to 42%, and for reentering dads, that was 52% to 53%. However, fathers who were in a relationship at the beginning and end of the program reported more satisfaction with the way they handled conflict with their partners. So, for example, if we look at the percentage of fathers who said they were very satisfied with how they and their partners handled conflict, for community fathers, that increased from 45% to 52%, and similarly for reentering fathers, it increased from 48% to 52%. So they felt like they were handling conflict better. Community fathers reported higher employment over time. So this looks at, this includes working full-time. It also includes other types of work. That could be part-time, it could be seasonal or temporary work, and both working for both of those categories increased, and the percentage who were not working at the time of the survey decreased from 53% to 40%. So the performance measures, which is what I've just been talking about, were collected by all of the grantees, but a subset of grantees also did their own, what we call local evaluations. And this is when they identified questions that were of interest to them, and they worked with an evaluator to answer those questions. So 15 of our responsible fatherhood grantees conducted a local evaluation. 7 of them conducted what we call a descriptive evaluation. So that could be looking at program operations, or it could be looking at clients change over time. And 8 conducted an impact evaluation. And so, as I mentioned, with the pre-post changes, the change over time, we don't know if that was caused by the program, but with an impact study, we do. An impact study is able to isolate the effects of a program, so what the program did for clients' outcomes. So they're really designed to address whether and how programs affected clients' outcomes. I will say, however, that grantees who did a local evaluation are not necessarily representative of the full cohort. This is 15 of our 40 grantees. They may differ in some ways from the larger set of grantees, and they're not necessarily representative of all RF programs. Nonetheless, I think they have some interesting findings that can inform other programs, other work. So as we've talked about before, recruitment and participation are just some key challenges for programs. And some of the descriptive evaluations looked at these issues. And in terms of recruitment, they found, and this probably may not be a surprise to many of you, but that it took a lot of work for programs to meet their recruitment goals. And they had to often change or modify their recruitment activities. So for example, maybe they had to add new partners, or they had to offer incentives to clients, or they might have just had to spend their time building and maintaining the relationships with their existing partners, reminding their partners, that they would to still refer clients to them or to allow them to do the recruitment on site. So it wasn't like a one and done, now you have this partnership and you're fine. They continually had to work with their partners to maintain their recruitment numbers. Participation, again, was a challenge, and this has come up in several of our other sessions, which I think is really interesting. But some of these descriptive evaluations concluded that fitting curricula into a longer session in a shorter time period seems to be promising for improving participation. So for example, if you have a 10-hour curriculum, you might want to offer it in a 5-week period with 2-hour sessions versus a 10-week period with 1-hour sessions. So that's just an example of taking a curriculum and compressing it in a shorter period of time with longer sessions. The impact evaluations did show some favorable effects. So, for example, some of the local evaluations found favorable outcomes on co-parenting quality. So that could be something like the way co-parents communicate with each other, and economic stability, including employment and receipt of public assistance. They didn't, however, find impact on every area they looked at. So there were not impacts on healthy relationships, on parenting skills and behaviors, or children's well-being in these local evaluations. So as we've said before, this is really just a few highlights from our reports that are coming out. There will be 3 separate reports, one for RF, one for a healthy marriage adults serving adults, and one for healthy marriage programs serving youth. And if you really want more details, we're also going to be releasing a technical appendix that will describe the methods, and it's going to describe even more findings than the report. So we have a lot of information if you're interested in digging in. We're developing what we're calling the interactive snapshots for responsible fatherhood and healthy marriage. This will be online. It will allow people to actually manipulate some of the data. You'll have ways to filter the data if you're interested in clients with certain characteristics or grantees with certain characteristics. So we're very excited about that. More information will be available soon. Everything will be released through the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation website. So check back there for more information when it comes out. And last, I'll just mention, I just skimmed the surface of these local evaluations, just highlighted a couple of findings, but there's much more, both for RF and HM. The full text of every local evaluation report is available online, and the link is there, and somebody asked for the link earlier, and so we also put it in the chat. All right, and so that's our presentation for responsible fatherhood, and now I'm very excited to turn it over to our panel. I think we have a really great group, and we're going to have a phenomenal discussion. So I do have to stop sharing, though, just for a second, so I can pull up my notes. I want to introduce our panel. Leah, if you're there, if you could pull up the slides, that would be great. I'm going to pull up my notes. Okay, so we have 5 people on our Responsible Fatherhood panel. I'm going to start with Kirk Berry. He is a project manager with Public Strategies, where he serves on the HMRF Technical Training and Assistance team. Kirk has worked in the social science field for over a decade, and most recently he directed Project DAD, which stands for Developing Active Dads, which was on behalf of a nonprofit in Philadelphia called People for People. Kirk really stewarded this project from the beginning. That included recruiting, hiring, training, and supporting a staff of 15 who were responsible for providing services to over 500 fathers each year. Kirk's areas of expertise include responsible fatherhood, parent-child relationships, youth empowerment, and program development and management. Next, we have Ava Stiles, who's the Director of Family and Supportive Services for Pathway Incorporated. That includes Brothers United Fatherhood Program and Sisters United Motherhood Program. And these both serve mothers and fathers that reside in Lucas County, Ohio. Ms. Stiles has had the opportunity to be a project director for a federal Healthy Marriage and Responsible Fatherhood program, and she's passionate about fathers. Her motto is, change a father, change a family, and create a future. Our third panelist is Katrina Johnson, who's the founder and chief executive officer of Horizon Outreach. Horizon Outreach specializes in serving military and non-military families. They provide evidence-based programs to stabilize families through healthy relationship education and job readiness training. Ms. Johnson is also a United States Air Force veteran. She's a real estate entrepreneur, and she's a former corporate businesswoman. Fourth, we have Armand Perry, who is a professor at Kent School of Social Work within the University of Louisville. Dr. Perry's research efforts center on the interpersonal, and external factors that influence men's involvement in the lives of their children and families. He also looks at the impact of that involvement on the family's well-being. His research has pointed to the tools, resources, and experiences that shaped men's ability to be involved fathers, the roles that mothers play in fathers' involvement, and social service providers' attitudes towards engaging fathers. And last but not least, of course, we have Sherry Tillis, who's been a force in the social service community of St. Louis, Missouri for more than 25 years. Ms. Tillis has worked within the urban core and underserved communities with the Fathers and Family Support Center. They've served more than 17,000 fathers, impacting more than 45,000 children for 18 years. And Ms. Tillis has a passion for reconnecting families and ensuring that every child has two responsible parents. She's spoken at many venues where she shared the advantages of responsible fatherhood and the importance of father-child bonding. So welcome to all of you. I'm so glad to have you. So I want to remind our audience that if you have any questions, to please put them in the chat, and we will pick them up. And yes, I see somebody pointing out we do still have the wrong slide. We're not on a break. We're trying
Sorry
to get that
for
fixed.
that. We are working behind the scenes to correct that as soon as we can. Sorry, there is a technical freeze that we're trying to overcome. We'll have it up as soon as we can. Sorry about that, Sarah.
No, yeah, that's okay. So we're doing our best, but I hope it sounds like everybody can still hear us, and we still have our panel, so I think we can soldier on. All right, so I'm also having trouble seeing my panelists. I hope you all are here. So I want to start by opening it up like we have for the other sessions about sort of your overarching impressions of these findings, what we learned, if, what you think is important about what we're learning, if anything surprised you, and sort of your overall takeaways from our findings. So I'm going to just, for this initial round, I'll just go through one by one, and we'd like to hear your thoughts. So why don't I start with you, Kirk?
Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to see that so many people are still participating in this wonderful discussion. And so I'd just like to share briefly one thing that stuck out to me, which I think is really important in this work, is related to the recruitment. Specifically, programs have to do and be out in the community as much as possible. There is no one way. There is no secret sauce. The data shows that it takes a variety of effort, and it takes not only putting things on platforms such as the radio or billboards or buses, depending on where you live, but in really to connect with fathers, we also have to be in the community, and that also includes our partners. When it comes to recruitment and enrollment, we really have to make sure programs continue to understand that's an ongoing thing for a 5-year cycle or 4-year, however long you're funded, or if your organization just does the work continuously, like some of the our peers on the call now. It's a constant thing, and so that's the one thing I'll touch on and let others share as well.
Thank you. Avis, do you want to share your thoughts?
Sure. I think that good afternoon, everyone. I agree with Kirk on the recruitment effort, and hopefully we'll get into that a little bit more because it is multiple ways and things that you need to do in order to get, I think someone mentioned a father's butt in seat. So that's a good way to say that. I think one of the things that surprised me, not really though, but because we looked at this before, is the question that asked why a father came to the program, that he wanted to learn to be a better parent. And at one point, we started to ask another question, if it was child support or co-parenting, to try to drill down to see if did they really just want to be a better parent, or what were the issues? And so that was surprising to me that was number one, because we saw some different things at fathers really coming in for their child support issues, and then also having some issues around co-parenting as well.
So Avis, are you saying that the fathers were more likely, it was the child support they were saying was their primary reason when you would drill down?
Yes, primary child support and also co-parenting issues. But they just they would just check, learn to be a better parent, because it's the first thing there and other options were not present.
Gotcha. Okay. Katrina, would you share your thoughts?
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Definitely to tag on to the recruitment, and I would say also the target fathers that we've served with Horizon Outreach. I noticed that in the findings, there was a large percent of fathers that were served between the ages of 25 to 34, and that's kind of right in line with the numbers or the demographics that we have in our program. Most of the fathers range in age from 25 to 40, but they have young kids. One of the other things that I thought was a little bit surprising to me. Well, not so much surprising, but with our fathers, normally they'll come to the program and they'll say that they're coming for the forklift incentive, TWIC incentive, things of that nature. But once we do the exit surveys and they actually get to the program and they start getting the information from the curriculum, most of them report that they want to be a better parent. They want to improve in their relationship. So they come for one thing, expecting to just get incentives, but they leave with so much more.
Thank you. Armand, could you share your thoughts?
Sure. Thank you for having me. I would agree and echo much of what my co-panelists mentioned as it relates to what I think we found a lot in our program, which was a sort of a disconnect between our interest in increasing fathers' parenting knowledge and parenting skills, and many of them showing up with essentially job placement as a priority. And then it was also the case that we had a child support arrears forgiveness incentive, and obviously we were trying to work with our dads and uplift them and empower them in whatever ways we could, trying to remove as many barriers as was possible. But it was also oftentimes the case that the child support arrears forgiveness incentive became, for many guys, their primary motivation for enrolling in the program. And for me, that was a little bit disappointing and disheartening. But anyway, I think some of the other things that stood out to me was I took notice of the largest demographic group being at 25 to 44. That was consistent with what we saw in our program. On average, I got for about 35, 36, and they had kids who were around 9 years old. The reason why I mention that is because I think about that in conjunction with the idea that there were fewer men reporting being in relationships post-intervention than there were at the beginning. I think that underscores the importance of the work that we needed to do around co-parenting, because necessarily these relationships are fluid, and with issues like multiple partner fertility, it necessarily requires dads to be able to have access to their children, and have the types of relationships and amicable and functional relationships with their co-parents that will allow them to have the type of access to be able to apply whatever it is they're learning in programs. So I thought that was important. The thing that surprised me, there was only one thing that surprised me, which was in the slide on the racial demographics on the re-entering dads. I was surprised that there wasn't more disproportionality there. I think it said that around 19% of those dads were African American, and we know that in terms of prison population, there's a lot more disproportionality there. So I was interested and intrigued at what may have been sort of explaining or contributing to that data. So those are my initial thoughts, though.
Thank you. And Sherry, would you share your thoughts?
Sure, and good afternoon, and thanks so much for having me. And I just echo what my panelists have stated, but something that stood out for me while reviewing the report was that there were 45,233 fathers that actually completed the ACS, which to me speaks to the level of need for these type of services within our communities. I thought that was, just huge. It also speaks to the number of fathers that want to be involved in their children's lives. And here at the organization, we've always started off a lot of our presentations with reminding people that fathers are parents and they love their children. And I think this echoes that sentiment that they want to be involved, they want to be in their lives. Also, I definitely agree with the reasons for their coming along the lines of parenting and employment. Oftentimes at our organization, we say that we're competing with employment to get them through the parenting components because, they're equally important to our fathers. And so oftentimes, we have to make sure that we can front load some of that parenting information before they go off and get that employment opportunity. So I think that a lot of what we are seeing and learning here is dead on. And just to speak in reference to the recruitment, yes, and it was actually great to see that we all share the same issues when it comes to recruitment. You have to turn over every rock, and one of the ways that we try to break that barrier is to actually use our facilitators to do the grassroots recruitment. And so
that person that they meet the first day they ever hear about our service is the same person they see when they step foot into the classroom. And so I just saw some of those ways that other programs were using as being very effective to capture the attention of the audience. For us, though, we remain at about 63% as word of mouth recruitment or referral. And so the proof is in the pudding. So for those who have gone through the program, we've always asked them, hey, refer your family and friends. And it's proven true that that's one of the most effective ways to recruit individuals.
That's great. Thank you, all of you. So recruitment, I think, has come up multiple times in your responses. So I'd like us to start talking about that. It's hard, right? And we see how many methods and all of the programs have to do. Do the findings that it's the partner agencies are really central to recruitment, does that resonate with your experiences? What do you have to do to work with these partner agencies?
Well, if I could just start off by sharing some of the things that we do is we have a really strong relationship with our Child Support Enforcement Office here in St. Louis. And so they've allowed us to come into each one of their offices on the days where they are establishing paternity, when most fathers are actually coming through those offices. And so that's just an opportunity for us to talk directly to them. One of the other things that they did is when they're sending out the letter to inform fathers that, they are interested in talking with them about their children, they put at the bottom of each one of those letters that if they need more information or assistance, they can reach out to our organization. And so, that has been a very helpful relationship for us in meeting recruitment.
I would add to that by saying that to answer the question directly, I think the referral partners play a critical and integral role in any fatherhood initiative. For us, it was those relationships, connections in the community that were the lifeblood of our organization, particularly given that ours was a relatively new initiative. It's not as though we had a lot of credibility in the community. And so we ended up having to sort of build up some trust and some goodwill across the community, and had it not been for the fact that some of our partner agencies had established and pre-existing relationships with dads, we would have been finding it a lot more difficult to be able to connect with and engage dads. But we were able to sort of leverage some of our relationships to lend us some credibility until we built up some of that word of mouth that Cherie is talking about.
What types of organizations have that credibility with fathers in your community?
For us, it was the maternal and child health programs. We have what we call here in town the neighborhood places, and they're sort of one-stop shops for social services. They do a little bit of everything from CPS work to public assistance to, like I said, maternal and child health programs, child abuse prevention. So it was job placement, job career readiness, WIA programs, workforce incentive act programs, and things of that nature, where men were coming in and out of those places and spaces, either receiving services themselves or accompanying their partners or their children's mothers in terms of well baby visits and appointments along those lines. And we were able to not only catch some of them on site, but also build up the type of relationships with those providers and those interventionists, so that as they were engaging dads in whatever conversations they were with their services, they would also put a plug in for what it was that we were doing.
And what about others? What were sort of your most successful recruitment methods?
We did not have as much luck with community partners at first. We do now. It took us a long time to build our reputation and to build with them. So for instance, our child support office, we had a love-hate relationship for several years. We're good friends now. So we worked through, but it was very difficult for them to understand and for us to understand them. But some of the changes that we sought for, we just are now seeing those changes now. So we're excited about that. We really got it, we kind of got it on our own. We kind of went out on the streets. We talked to fathers. We really, really worked really hard at our word of mouth, just making sure that you could see our program everywhere. So we did billboards and flyers so that you know, by the time you got to us, you had at least saw our logo somewhere, somehow. It took us quite a few years, but we did have our best working relationship with our child welfare department. And so we were able to actually reunify some dads with their children, and that gave us some credibility. And so we're very strong in that area. And they sent us the most referrals out of all of our other community partners.
Oh, interesting.
And if I could jump back in, I just wanted to attest to Avis's and her team's the strength of their street game. We actually spent some time doing a site visit there, and we hung out. Was it the Spot? Was it the name of the shopping center, Avis? Yeah, and so we actually spent some time at the Spot watching Avis and her team do their thing, and it was a sight to behold, in which they were able to connect with dads and engage them in authentic and real ways. So definitely salute you and your team for doing that.
So I'd like to share in Philadelphia, as it related to Project Dad and our recruitment with our partners, the most successful thing was having a routine schedule of when we would go in and either provide updates about the program to those partners and their staff, case managers. So for example, if it was probation and all the probation officers around the Philadelphia community, or if it was the one-stop shops, like Dr. Perry mentioned. So whatever partners we did have, we would have staff that would routinely go in there, scheduled maybe once a month or every other month, and just give updates to the program, highlight maybe some individuals that they referred. And we had a very small ask of partners because we also understand that community partners have their own job and responsibilities to do. So a lot of times when they would send 2 or 5 dads to our orientations or refer to our program, it was usually individuals who we knew would fit and work out really well. And then when it comes to our most successful recruitment, everything did a little bit different. When we were on the radio, it got phone calls immediately. So like the front staff and the secretaries would say, hey, let us know before you go on the radio so we can have enough people to man the phones and ask questions. But that didn't always mean that many people referred, because anybody that was listening to the radio may have heard myself talking or dad highlighting what he did, and anybody could call in. It wasn't just fathers. It would be grandmas, it would be girlfriends or wives, and it would be dads. So you just have to be prepared to answer the phones. But when we weren't on the radio, we also noticed that our commercials got a lot of phone calls as well, but our radio interviews got the most. But then we also created I think it was a 60-second YouTube video link that we started getting our partners and our entire program staff and dads to share about the program. And so in 60 seconds, we talked about the program. We had 2 dads share what their experience was. It might have been 2 minutes long, but we try to keep stuff around the 90-second. But that YouTube video, our only goal in our community was to make it go viral, meaning that if enough people seen it, because it didn't highlight about our organization as a whole, it only spoke to Project Dad and what it helps fathers do. So that YouTube video was something when a dad wanted to know what the program was about, and maybe he stopped by our resource table, didn't have time. Maybe we seen him outside of child support court because we spent a lot of time out there, like Avis did at the post. If a dad said I didn't have time, we said, hey, let us just text you this number. If you text us this video, if you like what you see, just let us know and we can call you back. If you don't like it, tell us you're not interested. But if you know somebody could benefit, share it with them. Once you do that, you have their phone number, you know they're going to like the video, or at least they'll share it with somebody else. That really helped. So those were some of our most effective ways outside of presenting at the partner agencies.
These are such creative ideas. So I want to turn to the finding that the why fathers said they enrolled, that not the majority, but about half of the community fathers said they enrolled. The primary reason was parenting. But I heard some of you say sort of during the introduction that that didn't necessarily correspond to your experience. Do you have any more thoughts on that as sort of the motivation? And people are complex, right? So there's often multiple motivations to do things. But do you have insights into why fathers were enrolling in your program?
So I'll speak to that. Here at Horizon Outreach, like I was saying initially, a lot of the fathers hear about our program because other fathers through word of mouth tell them about the program through other community partners. And they come to the program because of our strong employment our employment piece, where we definitely provide the certifications. We help with obtaining employment for the fathers. So that's initially kind of how they hear about it. But also there's camaraderie that's built among the fathers while they're in the program, because they're called Eagles, and those dads, they convey that to other fathers that, hey man, you go there, you're an Eagle, they're taking care of you, they're really helping you to achieve your goals. But what I can say, again, based on the data that we collected initially, when the fathers are coming in on their intake form or when they're calling in, that is one of the first things they ask about is, hey, I want to get my forklift license. I want to get my TWIC card. Overall, that does equate to taking care of the family. But when they're coming in, that's what they're asking about. But I think the staying power for those fathers is when they get here and they go through the curriculum, through the modules, then they start learning that, hey, I really need other things that maybe they didn't convey initially. Maybe they need those anger management skills. Maybe they need healthy relationship, how to talk to their partner, how to work through issues and problems, and certainly how to obtain, do an effective job search. So it turns out that may be what led them here, but that's not what keeps them in the program.
That's a great insight. Do others have thoughts on why fathers are enrolling?
Yeah, I think we had a unique, because we did an impact study with young fathers, and so we had a unique feel to our program. And so again, because of this camaraderie thing, right? So we did our randomized control trial on young fathers who are ages 20 to 24. And so we were actually competing with games. And so we came up with slogans that would make you feel comfortable, make you feel like you're a part of the group. And so that was one of the reasons we really built up some street credibility, right, in these worst neighborhoods in our cities. And so that kind of helped us get our reputation out. But really, co-parenting was a big issue. Visitation, gatekeeping was huge. And again, those child support issues that young fathers were learning real quickly that they were racking up a huge bill. And so they kind of got the word out. Like, if you go over here, they'll at least tell you what to do. They have all the paperwork. They know what to do. But then again, also too, I think that I would have to credit the staff and our team with really having a sense of caring, right? So because we work in the urban core, we serve about 75% African American. We know how to code switch. We know how to meet those needs. And so sometimes African Americans need to feel you. Like, they know you there, but they need to feel you. So we had to feel you thing. So when we would walk in the room, we had to feel you thing, which would really give us that sense of how to reach out and connect them. So I think all of those things in conjunction, but really co-parenting has been very huge for us, and where we saw the data really rise up in how we serve the fathers.
I would say for our program, I know a majority of dads, much like Katrina's at Horizon, they were coming for the certifications. We offered forklift as well. We offered OSHA 10 construction safety. And then we also offered the food handler ServSafe certification as well. And we knew that that was a big draw when we recruited. We didn't mind sharing that and letting them know that they can get that free of no cost. But as they had to go through the parenting and healthy relationship courses first, and that was the bulk of the time that they spent there, because a OSHA certification doesn't take long, and neither does a forklift. So by the time they finally get to those certifications, to Katrina's point, they're talking about how they really got more out of the healthy relationship and parenting workshops than just getting the certification. And specifically around healthy relationships, we would always tie in that they need to have a healthy parenting relationship. They need to have a healthy co-parenting relationship, right? So father to child, father to mother, but then they need to have a healthy employment relationship as well. And so a lot of the things that are covered in the healthy relationship curriculum around communication and things like that, you could very well tie into their employment. So they would see the big picture. But when I look at the data saying that a lot of fathers wanted to come to be a better dad, that means so much. That means that I maybe want to provide more money financially. So that part of being a better dad could be employment. Being a better dad could mean you want more time. But I know for our program, it was definitely, we had over 50% that came specifically for wanting to get employment.
Mm-hmm. That's super interesting. Grace, I want to pause and see. I haven't been monitoring the chat. Have we gotten questions from the audience?
It's one question in there.
Oh, is there?
Yeah,
I can't see it.
we have, and actually, so we have a couple of questions. I think if we start with the second one first, it connects nicely with this discussion with the person writing. We don't have a problem with recruiting. It's actually getting fathers to come to the classes and asking, does the panel have any advice with this?
So I'll speak to that. I think the environment and experience that you create within your organization, one that's a draw for that father. Certainly incentivizing them to come to the workshops as well. You may not always have the budget for the incentive, so that's where having a strong case management team in place, or if that's your program assistant, whomever's making the follow-up calls, or when that father drops off from attending, really getting a good understanding as to why he's dropping off. Is it because he's received employment? And if so, being flexible enough with your makeup sessions to provide something immediately so that he can make up that session, whether that's after hours, on the weekend, that would be the goal. And then again, going back to case management and initial intake, really having a good understanding and making sure the father has a good understanding of what the program expectations are. And then you having an understanding of why he's in the program. Sometimes fathers are program eligible, but maybe not program ready. So that's very key to being successful. It's not just about enrollments. At the end of the day, you want completions as well.
Right. And similar to what Katrina was saying, we also had to take a look at when we were actually recruiting participants, because for us, our process is 6-week class, Monday through Friday, 8 to 4, and we start with cohorts. And so it's not a rolling enrollment. And before we had open enrollment, so we may have participants that have to wait almost 8 weeks to enter a class. And so we learned that if we limited that time of actually enrolling in the class to only 2 weeks before class starts, we had about a 40% increase in the number of those that were actually showing up for the class. The other thing that we put in place during this round of services is that we hosted an orientation session, and that allows them to be able to see where they were coming to, where the class will be held. They had a chance to meet all of the staff that they would be working with. And then they also had an opportunity to express any immediate needs that they had so that we could give them referrals on that first day that we encounter them so they can take care of, some of their most pressing issues before they even start class. So, once we were able to do some of those things, that began to form that level of trust that they had in our abilities to actually address some of the issues that they would bring to the table.
Yeah, reducing the barriers is very important barrier reducers, because even getting to a workshop can be a challenge for a father. So if you can provide a bus token ahead of time, or definitely assuring him that when he gets to your program, that you can take care of those needs, because we do that at Horizon Outreach. If they can get to the first session, after that, they're taken care of as far as transportation needs.
I hope that this does not come across rude, but if you have a problem getting people to classes, you have a problem with recruitment. So I think you have to go back and look at different methods, how you're doing it, what happens. I think, as Sherry said, when you're recruiting, are you doing open enrollment? Are you doing a cohort style? So really looking at your method. Are you doing mostly street outreach? Are people saying they want to come to you, but then they fall off? Why are they falling off? At what juncture are they falling off? So just really doing an extensive study at like what's really happening. I like to call it patching the hole. So I think you find the hole, you patch it, and you say, okay, that's where the hole is. I had that hole with open enrollment for about a good year. And then I realized that was just killing me and killing my staff, and then went to the cohort style method and saw a huge turnaround in doing that.
And so I'd like to add to everything that was said by saying, coming to classes. So while the comments have been about getting to the program and like that first class, when we talk about continuing to come to classes, I want to put a strong emphasis that that's on the relationship of those individuals who are teaching the workshops.
Oh,
They're the
absolutely.
ones that help those fathers come from one session to the next. And so while we may give incentives for showing up, while we may reduce barriers for showing up, when we talk about getting fathers to come to the classes after the first class, now we're talking about retention. It is going to be based on the strength of those that are on your team teaching the curriculum, and specifically coming from to class number 2 or 3. How do you make class 1 and 2 different than any other program that they've ever been to before? Or is it the same standard? Here go our rules, here go our regulations. Like, and it's like, oh, I've been to a program like this before. Or is there an opportunity for them to really share what they want to get out of it? Like, how can it be really activity based where someone goes, you know what? I like coming here. And specifically because we're talking about fatherhood, dads never have a problem going to the barbershop over and over and over again just to talk. Make that your workshop environment. But because you have skilled facilitators, they should always be learning something. We may not always learn something at the barbershop. It just might be a bunch of arguing. But my whole point to that is if we're talking about coming to classes, it needs to be a place where dads can share. And if your program is just talking to them and those facilitators aren't building that relationship, that could be the other hole that Avis was talking about that needs to be filled. Are you monitoring what that relationship is like with those facilitators?
Great. Thanks so much.
I want to clarify something on that. I'm sorry. Just so it's clear at Horizon Outreach. So again, we are reducing those barriers for the person that's on the call. That's very important because once again, the dads don't have, a lot of the dads that come here, it's a mixture of whether they're dads that are on parole, probation, former incarcerated, military, what have you. They may not have those funds if they're out of work to get to the organization. So that is key to reduce those barriers. But certainly, first and foremost, is the experience that you create within your organization for that father. And because we've done that and actually have an award, we've won an award for that, the Urkel Award for participation. I think it's very important to say that is the main reason why those fathers come. Because again, all of the staff have to have that facilitators, your person at the front desk, whomever you have, your case managers, they have to build that relationship with the father.
Great. Thanks so much. And I just want to turn to the other question we received, which is, have any of the panelists offered trauma-informed trainings for program providers? And if so, any advice or experiences to share on that? I see Avis nodding.
Yeah, most definitely working with the young fathers in the urban core. All staff is trained to trauma-informed care. We are now, out of the lessons that we've learned, we are now using the ACEs test with all of our fathers so that we can see where they are, and then being able to hone in. And we also using it with the mothers as well. So that was a big thing. The trauma, listening to the trauma of young fathers, and just trying to really hone in and approach that has really shaped how we do our work now. So I definitely would advise that all of your staff is trauma informed and taught very well.
I would add to that, I think it's also important to even as we think about what constitutes a trauma, right? So, I mean, so much of what guys are dealing with is the loss of relationships. Oftentimes that relationship could be the one with their kid where they don't have, again, the type of access that they want. And their access ebbs and flows based on, at least according to what the guy said, the whims of the child or the parent. It may be that their relationship with their co-parent is a loss that was traumatic for them. In many cases, the trauma starts even before that. As Ava said, a lot of these guys come from communities where they are either victims of violence or exposed to violence and have difficulty even naming their feelings as trauma. In many instances, the dads have not had the best relationships with their own fathers, and that could be a trauma. And you think about the cumulative effect of those things, and then all at once, we're expecting them to be able to flip a switch and be fully emotionally available to their own children. And the reality is that's just not the way that things operate. So one of the keys for us was to be able to, folks are talking about the removal of barriers, making sure that we had resources and referrals ready for guys to be able to connect with professionals who could help them work through and unpack many of the issues that they were wrestling with, many of them who had gone unresolved and unaddressed for the entirety of their lives.
For us at Fathers and Families, in addition to the ACEs and a couple of other assessments we do, such as the depression scale, on our staff, we have coaches that assist them with that. And then each day starts with the therapeutic circle and allows our participants to unpack, because, you know, if they come in with a pressing issue that they've just experienced that morning or the night before, they're not even open and ready to receive the curriculum or the teachings for that day. And so we take a lot of extra care to have social service or therapeutic staff in the room during that first hour of the day, so that they can understand that, you know, your feelings matter, what you're going through matters, and here's some solutions to that.
So I'd like to jump back in and say that because this cohort was so unique that nobody mentioned it, but I'm going to mention it, that we dealt with the pandemic. That we actually had to switch from doing in-person classes to virtual, but there are some other things too. There's a trauma of poverty, right? We experience all kind of things in this country, racism. So there's trauma of racism, and then also trauma of COVID-19. We were literally working with participants who had lost their parents to COVID. And so, you know, when you think about all of the things and where this country is now, we have a deeper call, I think, as practitioners to ensure that we are trauma informed and that we're exercising this. And shout out to Sherry Tillis and what they do. I'm just trying to get like you, Sherry. I'm just trying to get there.
So this is an amazing panel, and I really could listen to you all for a long time, and I thank you, but we are out of time. So I do want to wrap it up. I know, this is such a brain trust. This has been a fantastic discussion. So thank you so much to our panel. I really appreciate all of your thoughts, and I'm sure our audience does as well. But we are going to turn to our wrap-up session. Could we pull up the slides for that? Great, thank you. So I'm going to start us off, but I'm being joined by Sam Alonso-Sacra from OPRE. Sam, are you online?
Yes, I am. Hi, everyone.
Great. So I think this has just been a great day, and I hope you all got out of it as much as I did. I'm just really very appreciative to all of our panels for sharing your thoughts and your insight. I'm not sure that there we are. Okay. I do want to acknowledge that we've really focused on this third cohort of grantees, but there's actually a wealth of information from the previous two cohorts. The ACF has really invested in evaluations for every cohort so we can understand their implementation and we can understand their impacts. And the impacts are really critical, again, for understanding how the programs are affecting the people who are involved, understanding whether and how these grantees can help clients change. But the evaluations by design can only include a small number of grantees. And with this third cohort, we've really been able to expand our understanding to know what every grantee is doing, right? We have the performance measure data from every grantee. And we also have these many local evaluations across these three populations. And the local evaluations answer questions that the grantees themselves are interested in, but these answers resonate with lots of programs, right? As we're seeing, there are just these common challenges that thread many programs. So these local evaluations can really inform the broader field. We want to talk about a few of the themes that we heard today. This is not definitive. These are some notes we jotted down while we were listening to these fantastic discussions. So I'm sure somebody else would come up with a completely different set of themes than what we're going to do. But we just want to highlight some of the really interesting things that I think we heard from each of our panels.
How you doing?
Could everybody go on mute, please?
How many people
if you're not speaking,
do we have enrolled, and how many have completed as of today?
Thank you. Okay, So starting with our Healthy Marriage Adults, I just want to acknowledge what the panelists acknowledged, that these programs have an incredible reach. So many people have been enrolled and have been served, and there's been a great diversity in the clients enrolled in these programs. So somebody was pointing out that in Healthy Marriage, it was often really a focus on couples, but the number of individuals who are enrolled in these Healthy Marriage programs is actually quite large. And there's also diversity in ages, diversity in race and ethnicity, and diversity in other characteristics as well. I think there was a really interesting discussion about, that came up throughout, sort of this question of dosage. We're often looking for sort of the right amount of services to give people, and I'm sure there's never one right answer, but acknowledging that programs seem to do better in terms of participation if services are compressed in a shorter time frame, right? That you're able to build rapport with people, you're able to engage them in the services for longer, but you often don't get a very long time with your clients. So if you have, 4 to 6 weeks, sort of what can you achieve in that amount of time? And the acknowledgement that research doesn't always show that more services equal more change, right? So it's not necessarily if you gave them endless amount of services that people would just get better and better, that there are sort of keeping in mind that balance of keeping people engaged and achieving the goals of the program. The acknowledgement that sometimes small changes are actually victories or even things stable, because sometimes without an intervention, people's outcomes can get worse, right? The relationships can worsen. So even sometimes if things are stable, that's actually a victory. And the Healthy Adults panel also was talking about all these interesting questions, and some of the audience too was saying, with all these questions we want to know the answer to. Who's most likely to participate? Who has are there certain groups for whom there are greater changes over time or greater impacts? And we have such a lot of data that we can start to dig in there. For Healthy Marriage Youth, I just want to acknowledge a couple of things that I heard. I thought it was so important for, they were talking about how youth often, they're just starting out their relationships, right? So they don't always know what a healthy relationship looks like. They don't know how to navigate relationships. They don't know how to get out of a relationship if it feels wrong for them. And they may overestimate their ability to negotiate these relationships. So it's this importance that, often they see a very curated look at relationships on social media and sort of understanding what real relationships look like and require. Again, we talked about the time frame that, sometimes meeting with youth multiple times a week really helps establish that rapport between staff and youth, and that helps keep youth in the program. They talked about the importance of partnering, that these programs are often embedded in schools. So you really need to have the buy-in from school staff and teachers to have a successful program, but also for those hard to reach students or youth, the importance of working with programs that are already reaching them, right? Because then you can build on the successes of those programs. And finally, I'll just acknowledge the importance of understanding the program in the context of youth lives. If they have much greater needs, like unstable housing or food insecurity, that's going to take precedent over the relationships, but the program can still be a resource and help youth connect to resources that they need. So there was much more, but I want to give Sam a chance to talk about what she heard in the RF session.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. And of course, we just finished talking about this, so it's probably all very fresh in your mind, but some of the main themes I think we discussed first, especially particularly related to recruitment. I think we heard from all the panelists that strong partnerships are really critical. We saw that in the data that Sarah presented as well, but that programs really have to be out in the community, that they have to be doing as much as possible and using a range of approaches to really be able to recruit fathers. So we talked then more about why, what we saw about why fathers were enrolling in programs, and I think all of the panelists touched a little bit on how fathers would often arrive saying that they are there for the certifications, for the employment trainings, for the work-related services, but really after participating in the program, they learned that they really needed so much more, that they wanted so much more in terms of the healthy relationship content, the parenting content, co-parenting services and kind of highlighted their reason for enrolling into the program also being to be to strengthen their parenting and be a better parent. We touched a little bit on this issue of getting fathers not only to enroll in the program and be recruited, but also to come to classes, to stay, and to participate throughout the whole program. And our panelists all talked about their experiences using approaches like incentives, really thinking about what it means to make the program inviting. I was really compelled by Kirk's point about kind of making the first and second class different from any other class, so that they're not just hearing kind of the same things that they've always heard in these classes and wondering, you know, why am I here, but really getting to see why these programs are so unique and important and what they can offer them. They talked about, our panelists talked about reducing barriers, providing things that fathers really need and want, not only to get out of the program, but to really be able to be there, to whether it's transportation, whether it's what they need to, you know, be able to manage their other commitments in their life. So that was something that I think was really elevated. And then finally, we ended that session talking about the importance of trauma-informed trainings. And I think everybody highlighted how critical that was, especially I think the final point made about kind of the world that we're living in now, in particular with the pandemic, our, you know, reckoning with all of the racism experienced by so many participants, poverty, and all of the associated traumas. And so really making sure that the program staff is prepared to address that trauma in the participants that arrive at the program.
Thanks, Sam. So I know we are really running low on time. So I think maybe we'll skip this poll and then you can just move on to the next. Okay. Move on.
Great. So where are we going next? So I think you all likely know that in September, we awarded a fourth cohort of grant programs. 30 of those were Healthy Marriage programs that are serving adults through the Frameworks grant program. 24 of those are Healthy Marriage programs that are serving youth through the Ready for Life program. And then 58 of those are Responsible Fatherhood grant programs through the Fatherhood Fire grant program. So we now have this new cohort of grantees, and of course that means we have so much more to learn. So the next slide, we can move to that, talks about some of what we expect to learn with this grant cohort, a new grant cohort. So all of the grantees, as with the previous cohort, will be collecting performance measure data. We're going to build on what we learned with the 2015 cohort. And we looked at what we found with that cohort. We got feedback from grantees. We've modified some of the measures. And so we really look forward to seeing what we learned from this cohort through those performance measures. We're also going to be, again, the grantees will be doing local evaluations, a subset of them. So we have 43 descriptive evaluations that grantees are planning to do and 44 impact evaluations. And so there'll be a wealth of information there. And then in addition, a subset of grantees are participating in 2 federally led studies. So we have 10 Fatherhood Fire grantees, 5 Framework grantees, and 5 Ready for Life grantees participating in these 2 studies that are going to be using rapid learning methods to pilot and test approaches to addressing common implementation challenges, specifically some of the challenges that we talked about today a lot, including recruitment, retention in programs, and engaging participants in programs. So we do have a poll question. Do we have time to do it, Sarah, or do you want to just close up?
Well, we still have people on the line. So Derek, if you want to open the poll and people want to answer the question, that's great. We're almost done.
Oh, great. So yeah, so we really want to be able to continue to share information about the 2020 cohort throughout the grant period, and would like to know from you which format would you find most useful to get these findings from us? So is it a detailed report, a short brief, a one-page summary? Would you prefer going to a website, having videos, social media posts? So just go ahead and let us know which of these. I know maybe some of you might like multiple, but which, if you had one way of getting information, which would you pick as the top approach? And while you're doing that, I guess I could just say a few thoughts. We just wanted to thank you all so much for joining us, for sticking through this afternoon, and for participating, for entering your questions into the chat. I think we had some really amazing discussions. As Sarah said, you could have talked about it all afternoon. Our panelists were so wonderful and had such rich information to share and experiences to share. And I hope this community continues to communicate with each other. We will, as we said, continue to send out information. And we really appreciate your engagement. So is there anything else you wanted to add?
No, so that concludes. I apologize we went a little bit long, but it was so hard to cut off these great discussions. We just thank you for staying with us. And as we said, that there'll be a posting of the recording of this forum and other materials on OPRE's website coming later this fall. So thank you to everybody. Have a good evening.
Thanks all.